It was the middle of my high school winter break, and I was 17 years old at the time. My parents had decided to go out for the evening to attend a dinner party, leaving me completely alone in our house. It was an incredibly cold, quiet night, with the wind howling slightly against the glass windows. I was just hanging out and relaxing in our sunroom, which we had set up to use as a cozy little TV room. This room had a convenient side door that led directly out to our side driveway. Because it was the dead of winter, I had made sure all the window blinds were tightly shut to keep out the draft. I was wrapped up in a warm blanket on the comfortable couch, watching some random movie that I cannot even recall. Suddenly, the motion-sensing light outside turned on, flooding the room with bright light. This immediately concerned me. I reached for the remote and lowered the TV volume to listen for any sounds. It was unlikely I would hear anything through the thick walls, so I stood up and lifted the blinds just a tiny bit to check. The driveway was completely empty. There was no way to shut that light off, so I just had to wait for it to go out. I figured a raccoon or a possum had triggered the sensor, but the more I thought about it, the less sense that made. To ease my mind, I put on my shoes and walked outside. I walked around the driveway, checking the shadows. No one was there. Feeling relieved, I went back inside, locked the door, and sat back on the couch. Some time passed, and I was relaxing when a loud noise shattered the quiet. It sounded like a plastic bucket full of heavy items being knocked over on the driveway, and the motion light turned back on. Now, I was straight up scared. Someone or something was out there. I didn't want to get up because the couch was the only blind spot from the side door. I had a terrifying fear of standing up and seeing someone staring through the glass. The remote was on the coffee table, and I was too afraid to even reach for it. I stared at the closed blinds, but I wasn't looking at the plastic slats. I was looking at what was visible through them. It was a perfect shadow of a person standing on the other side, with their arms stretched out slightly. A wave of intense dread hit my stomach, and it felt hard to breathe. I got up as quietly as I could, but before I could reach the door to the dining room, the person began knocking aggressively on the window. I screamed in a shaky voice that I was calling the cops, hoping to scare them away. I stood by the doorway, waiting. The knocking stopped, but the shadow moved toward the side door. Through the glass, I saw an older woman with wild, wiry hair. She looked completely frantic. Suddenly, she began banging on the glass with both hands, screaming like she was out of her mind. I slammed the inner door shut, locked it, and dialed 911 to report a crazy woman trying to break in. The dispatcher told me to lock myself in a safe room with a weapon. I ran straight into the bathroom, grabbed a heavy metal plunger to use as a club, and locked the door. Then, my worst nightmare came true. I heard glass shattering in the back of the house. I waited in absolute silence for a minute. Slowly, I unlocked the bathroom door and peeked out. There she was. The old woman was standing in the middle of our living room, surrounded by broken glass. She spotted me immediately and rushed toward the door. I screamed, slammed the door shut, and locked it again. She began knocking on the bathroom door violently, whispering incoherently on the other side. I was sobbing, begging her to go away. Finally, I heard a loud bang at the front door. I opened the small bathroom window and screamed for help. 2 police officers ran over. I begged them to crawl through the broken window out back. The knocking on my door stopped as a loud commotion took place in the living room. The cops yelled at her to step away. When I finally stepped out, the officers had her handcuffed. It turned out she lived nearby with a relative who acted as her caretaker but neglected her. She had severe mental issues and belonged in a special care facility. My parents sued the caretaker, but we lost the lawsuit. At the very least, she was placed in a proper treatment center, and she was out of our neighborhood. Now let me tell you about another incident that happened to me just a few years later. I own a small, cozy cabin on a very big property in a highly rural part of upstate New York State. I love to go up there several times a year, especially during the cold winter months, to spend my weekends skiing. The property is surrounded by dense woods for miles. I have one neighbor separated by a wooden fence, whom I had never spoken to. There is another neighbor further down the road who also skis, so we had met a few times and got to know each other. It was January, and I was driving up to the cabin for my first trip of the season. As I walked up to the front door with my bags, I heard a young child laughing nearby in the neighbor's yard. I figured they must have kids visiting, which was news to me. Stepping into the cabin after months of being empty is always a chore. I had to turn on the water, start the heat, and get everything running. That first night, I slept like a baby after the long drive. The next morning, after breakfast, I changed into my ski gear and went outside. Sitting in the fresh snow on my front lawn was a large, bright red playground ball. It wasn't there the day before, so I assumed it belonged to the neighbors. I picked it up and threw it back over the fence. Then I drove off to the ski lodge. When I returned that night, it was pitch dark. I had already eaten dinner, so I was ready for bed. But as I walked to the front door, I noticed that big red ball was sitting on my lawn again, in the exact same spot. It was getting a bit odd, but I shrugged it off and threw the ball over the fence a second time before going inside. In the middle of the night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of a kid laughing outside. It made no sense for a child to be playing outside in the freezing cold at that hour. I looked out my window but couldn't see anyone. The moment I approached the glass, the laughter stopped. However, the red ball was sitting on my lawn again. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I put on my slippers and robe, walked out into the snow and picked up the ball. This time, instead of throwing it over the fence, I brought it inside my house, locked the door and went back to sleep. The next morning, before heading to the ski slopes, I walked over to the neighbor's house and knocked on the door. An elderly man answered. He seemed completely innocent and kind. I introduced myself and asked him about the child's laughter and the red ball. The old man looked confused. He told me he lived entirely alone and that there were absolutely no children living anywhere near our properties. I felt a chill run through me. I thanked him, shook his hand, and went back to my cabin. I left the red ball sitting right in the middle of my living room floor, locked the front door, and drove up the mountain to ski. When I returned that night, I was exhausted. I threw my gear onto the couch, planning to pack it up the next morning, and collapsed into bed. I fell asleep instantly, but in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by that same child's laughter outside. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. The red ball was sitting in the snow again. Terrified, I ran into the living room and tore the place apart, searching for the ball I had left inside. It was completely gone. I suddenly realized I was not alone in the house. Someone had unlocked my doors, taken the ball from my living room, and placed it back outside. Yet when I checked, all the doors and windows were still locked from the inside. I turned on every single light, packed my wet gear into my bags, and stood in my bedroom, ready to flee. I looked out the window one last time. Far behind the red ball, standing near the dark woods, was a small figure. It looked like a child, standing completely still, staring directly up at my bedroom window. I ducked down, closed the blinds, and went around the house, shutting every curtain. I sat on my bed, terrified, until I finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I skipped breakfast, packed my car, and drove away as fast as I could, leaving the red ball on the lawn. I still cannot figure out how anyone got inside my locked house, and that child's stiff figure standing in the snow still haunts my nightmares. My roommate George and I first met through our jobs at a local corporate marketing office. Since we got along so well right from the start, and both wanted to save some money on rent, we decided to search for a house to share together. The house we found was perfect, located just 15 minutes from the office, which allowed us to carpool together every single day. This routine worked great for us, and everything was peaceful until very recently. About 2 weeks ago, a new neighbor moved into the house right next door to ours. We never actually saw him unpacking his things, and we never saw a moving truck. In fact, we never even saw what he looked like. We did not know if the new occupant was a man, a woman, or how many people had moved in. I will refer to this neighbor as a he because of what we eventually discovered. On the 3rd day after he moved in, George and I decided to do the neighborly thing and go next door to introduce ourselves. We walked up the driveway, stepped onto the porch, and knocked on the front door. There was no answer. We knew someone was home because his car was parked in the driveway, and we could hear faint rustling sounds inside. We figured maybe he was just busy or did not feel like opening the door to strangers. As we turned around and began walking back down his driveway, George suddenly stopped me. He told me, under his breath, to look at the window right next to the front door. I looked over, and my eyes caught a small kink in the window blinds. A man was holding the slats open with his fingers, staring directly at us. It It was a cold, creepy, unblinking stare. George and I looked at each other in disbelief, quickened our pace, and kept walking back to our yard. We agreed that it was an incredibly awkward and deeply unsettling way to meet a neighbor. Now we knew for sure that this guy was not going to be the friendly neighbor we had hoped for. That night, at around 1 o'clock in the morning, I was suddenly awakened by strange noises coming from outside. It is warm where we live pretty much all year round, so we always keep our bedroom windows open to catch the night breeze. My bedroom is located upstairs, and it directly overlooks the neighbor's backyard, which was exactly where the disturbing sounds were coming from. I got out of bed, walked over to the open window, and looked down. I saw the new neighbor. He was a large, heavily built man, and he was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled tightly over his head. This was incredibly strange because it was about 72 degrees out that night, far too warm for a heavy hoodie. But what he was doing was even stranger. He was standing in the middle of his yard, vigorously sawing a large, thick piece of wood. The loud, rhythmic sound of the metal teeth tearing through the wood was incredibly disruptive. I walked out of my room and knocked on George's bedroom door. It turned out George was already awake, kept up by the exact same noise. He had to be at work early the next morning, and what this guy was doing at this hour of the night was completely nuts. The sawing just went on and on without stopping. We agreed that we had to go over and politely ask him to stop so we could get some sleep. Since he was outside, we decided to walk over and knock on his wooden side gate instead of his front door. Just as we reached the gate and knocked on it, the sound of the sawing suddenly stopped. We stood there in the dark, expecting the gate to open or for him to say something to us, but it never did. At least the noise had stopped, so we decided to head back inside and go back to sleep. It was not until a few nights later that we heard noises in the middle of the night again. I woke up, but I could not figure out what the sounds were right away. I got out of bed, walked over to my window, and listened closely. That was when I realized the sounds were muffled screams of sheer terror. The screaming seemed to be coming from inside the neighbor's house. I looked down into his backyard and saw the neighbor running out of his back door. He was in a frantic hurry, and he was dragging a large, heavy bag across the grass. Suddenly, he stopped. He turned his head and looked straight up at my second-story window. I immediately ducked out of sight, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran straight to George's room, and he was already awake from the noises too. He was already on the phone with the police, desperately reporting what was happening. I stood right by his doorway, listening to him describe the situation, when we suddenly heard a loud, violent slam from downstairs. It was our back door. We looked at each other with horrified looks on our faces. George screamed into the phone that the man had just entered our house and begged the dispatcher to send help immediately. While George stayed on the line, I crept out into the dark hallway and approached the top of the stairs. I listened as hard as I could. I heard the distinct, heavy creaking of our downstairs floorboards. Someone was inside. I tiptoed back to George's room, closed the door as quietly as possible, and we pressed our bodies against it. There was no lock on his door, so we had to use our own strength to keep it shut. George told the operator to have the police enter through our broken back door as soon as they arrived, and then he hung up. Suddenly, we heard heavy, fast footsteps coming up the stairs. The intruder began opening doors in the hallway. We heard our bathroom door slam open, and then our spare bedroom door. Then he reached George's door. The doorknob jiggled, and then a massive force hit the other side of the wood. The man was ramming his body against the door, trying to force his way inside. He began hitting the door with some kind of heavy, blunt object, splintering the wood. We knew we could not let him in. We had no idea what kind of weapons he had, and we were terrified for our lives. We pushed back with all of our strength, screaming at him to stop. After a few terrifying moments of pounding, the noise abruptly stopped. We heard his footsteps heavy on the stairs as he went back down to the first floor. A few agonizing minutes of silence passed. George and I slowly opened the door and peeked out into the dark hallway. There was no sign of him upstairs. Suddenly, we heard a deep, commanding voice shout from downstairs. He yelled that he was the police. Relief washed over us. George and I ran down the stairs, thinking the nightmare was finally over. But as we reached the bottom step, we did not see any police officers. Instead, I noticed a shadow moving behind our dining room table. The The neighbor was hiding right there, waiting for us. I screamed at George to run, and we scrambled back up the stairs as fast as we could. The man leaped out from behind the table and chased us up the steps, his heavy boots pounding behind us. This time, we ran straight into the bathroom because it was the only room with a working lock on the door. We slammed it shut, turned the lock, and pressed our bodies against it. Almost immediately, the man began violently hacking at the bathroom door, but within seconds, a real loud commotion erupted downstairs. We heard the front door get kicked open, and several voices began shouting for the police. The hacking on our door stopped instantly. George and I screamed at the top of our lungs that we were trapped in the upstairs bathroom. We heard the heavy footsteps of multiple police officers rushing up the stairs. They confronted the man right outside our door, screaming at him to drop his weapon and get on the ground. We heard the loud metallic clatter of a large kitchen knife hitting the hardwood floor. After the officers secured the suspect, they told us it was safe to come out. We opened the door and saw the neighbor pinned to the ground, his face pressed against the floor as they handcuffed him. We walked outside into the cool night air, shaking violently. The neighborhood was flooded with flashing red and blue lights. More police cruisers were pulling up by the second. We frantically told the officers on the scene about the screams we had heard coming from the neighbor's house. Several officers drew their weapons and rushed next door. A few minutes later, we watched in shock as the police led for a young woman out of the neighbor's house. She was sobbing hysterically, covered in dirt, but alive. It turned out she had been held captive, locked inside a hidden room in his basement. She had heard us knocking on the gate earlier and had tried to scream for help, which triggered the man's violent panic. When the police searched his backyard, they made an even more gruesome discovery. Inside the heavy bag the man had been dragging across the lawn was the body of another victim. We never found out the full details of who the victims were, or what drove this man to commit such horrific acts, but he was arrested on multiple charges of kidnapping and murder. He was sent to prison for life, ensuring he would never harm anyone again. Eventually, his house was cleaned out and put back up for rent on the market. George and I still live in our same house next door, but every single time we look over at that side driveway, we pray that whoever moves in next is just a normal, quiet, and peaceful neighbor. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments, and remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. It was about 4 in the morning one Saturday, and a driver was heading to work down the interstate. He was in the middle lane, moving pretty quickly because he was running late. The roads were mostly empty, which was typical for that hour, so when he noticed a car in his left mirror catching up to him incredibly fast, he was almost alarmed. He was already going about 75 or 80 miles per hour, so this other vehicle had to be flying down the road at anywhere from 90 to 100 miles per hour. Within seconds, the car caught up to him. It was a gray Honda Accord coupe. Out of pure curiosity, the young man took a look into the vehicle as it began to pass him, wanting to see who was behind the wheel at this hour. Even though it was still pitch black outside, the highway lights were bright enough to illuminate the inside of the passing car. He could clearly see the driver looking back at him with a strange, intense stare. But then his eyes drifted toward the back seat, and that was when his heart dropped. There was a young woman in the back. She was frantically banging her hands against the rear window, her face contorted in absolute panic. At first, the young man did not entirely understand what he was seeing. His brain tried to rationalize it, assuming it was just a young girl messing around or playing a joke. It is usually not a person's first instinct to assume something sinister is happening right next to them on an open highway. But then, the illusion was shattered. He watched as the driver reached into the back seat with a sudden violent motion, forcibly pushing the woman down below the window line out of sight. At the exact same moment, the gray Honda swerved wildly across the lane. In that instant, the young man knew something was horribly wrong. That woman was not joking. She was desperately trying to get someone's attention to call for help because she was being held against her will. He realized he could not just drive away and ignore this. He stepped on the gas and got directly behind the gray Honda, doing his best to keep up with their dangerous pace. From this vantage point, he could see the driver continuously reaching into the back of the coupe with a violent, swinging motion. It looked like the driver was repeatedly hitting the woman. Through the rear glass, he could see her arms flailing as she tried to defend herself from the blows. The young man was in complete shock. He was witnessing a violent kidnapping unfold right in front of his eyes on a dark interstate. While maintaining their insane speed of about 95 miles per hour, he grabbed his cell phone and dialed 911. He quickly explained to the dispatcher what was happening, describing the car and their location. But as he was speaking to the operator, the brake lights of the Honda suddenly lit up. The driver was starting to slow down to a gradual stop right in the middle of the highway. He had clearly noticed the young man following him and realized that his actions had been spotted. The young man wanted more than anything to save the woman, but a wave of fear hit him. He did not know if the kidnapper was armed with a gun, and stopping on a dark, deserted highway next to a violent criminal seemed like a death sentence. So he made a split-second decision. He pulled around the Honda, floored the gas, and surged ahead. However, he refused to let them go. He pulled off at the very next exit ramp, but instead of driving all the way up to the local road, he stopped midway on the grass. He waited in the darkness for the gray Honda to pass by on the highway below. As soon as he saw the gray coupe speed past, he drove over the grass, merged back onto the highway, and floored it once again to catch up. All the while, he remained on the phone with the 911 operator, giving precise updates on their direction, their speed, and the highway mile markers. He was easily going 90 miles per hour again as he closed the distance, but the kidnapper was hyper-aware now. Before the young man could even get close, the gray Honda began to brake hard directly in front of him. The young man tried to swerve around, but the driver blocked him, cutting him off and forcing him to a complete stop. Suddenly, the driver door of the Honda flew open. A man stepped out and started running directly toward the young man's car, carrying something unrecognizable in his hand. Panicking, the young man threw his gear shifter into reverse and slammed on the gas, backing up down the highway as fast as he could until the attacker stopped chasing him. As soon as the man turned around to head back to his coupe, the young man shifted into drive, stepped on the gas, and sped past him before the man could get back inside his car. The 911 operator told him that a state trooper was parked just a short distance ahead and instructed him to keep driving until he reached the patrol car. The kidnapper got back in his Honda and gave chase, tailing the young man at an insane speed of over 90 miles per hour. Finally, the young man saw the most beautiful sight in the world. Flashing blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror. The state trooper had pulled onto the highway directly behind the chasing Honda. With the young man in front and the police car behind him, the kidnapper had nowhere to run. He quickly pulled over onto the grass shoulder. The young man pulled over as well, leaving a safe distance of about 2 car lengths. The trooper exited his patrol car with his gun drawn, screaming orders at the driver. Within moments, the suspect was out of the car, forced onto the ground, and placed in handcuffs. Another police car arrived to secure the scene. The officers opened the back of the Honda and let the young woman out. She was badly beaten, covered in tears, and absolutely ecstatic to be alive. She ran to the young man, crying and thanking him repeatedly for saving her life. It turned out that the driver was her abusive ex-boyfriend. He had showed up at her house uninvited, and when she refused to speak with him, he physically assaulted her, dragged her to his car, and threw her in the back. Because the coupe had child safety locks engaged, she had been completely trapped, unable to open the doors from the inside. It is a terrifying thought to imagine where he was taking her, or what he would have done to her if the young man had not paid attention to that passing car that morning. Let us transition to another incident that took place on a long, desolate stretch of highway. A young man had planned a trip to Boston to support a family member who was running in the famous Boston Marathon. He was driving from Chicago to Massachusetts, taking Route 20, one of the longest highways in the country. He hated flying, so he decided to drive. He started his journey around 3 in the afternoon, right after finishing his shift at work. His GPS estimated a 15-hour drive, but he figured he could make it in 14. His estimated arrival time was 6 in the morning, but he was aiming for 5. He was the type of driver who hated stopping on long road trips. He preferred to just power through the entire ride in one single go to get it over with. Most of Route 20 is wide open land, and there is not a whole lot of traffic on large stretches of it. About 10 hours into his journey, around 1 in the morning, he was basically the only car left on the highway. He had his music blasting as loud as it could go, just to keep himself awake through the darkness. He was feeling pretty good, thinking that he was almost done with the worst part of the trip, but he was starting to feel slightly tired, even after the 2 large cups of coffee he had drank earlier. He did not want to pull off the road for more coffee because that would slow him down, so he decided to just push through it. He knew that collapsing into a comfortable bed when he arrived would feel so much better if he did not stop now. One moment he was completely alone on the highway, and the next thing he knew, bright headlights appeared out of nowhere in his rearview mirror. He was driving in the left lane, and this vehicle was riding his bumper incredibly close. To avoid any potential road rage, he decided to switch over to the right lane. The vehicle, which looked like a ratty old pickup truck from the 90s, sped up a bit to pass him. But then, for some strange reason, the driver of the truck slowed down to match his speed exactly. The front bumper of his sedan was perfectly aligned with the rear bumper of the truck, and they just cruised next to each other like that for the longest time. Feeling uncomfortable, the traveler started to speed up to pass the truck, but as soon as he got in front of it, the truck turned into his lane directly behind him, coming so close that it looked like it was going to clip his car. He had no choice but to speed up even more to get this person off his tail. He was not looking to become the victim of a road rage incident, especially not at this hour of the night. As he accelerated, the pickup truck accelerated right along with him. He switched back to the left lane, and the truck switched lanes too, staying right on his bumper. Now he knew for sure that something was wrong. It could not be an unmarked police car because it was an old, beat-up truck. Suddenly, the truck started flashing its high beams rapidly behind him. The traveler refused to slow down. He was honestly terrified because he had never experienced anything like this on the road before. He kept driving, pressing down on the gas pedal to increase his speed by another 10 miles per hour, desperately hoping to pass a state trooper or any other car for that matter. But there were no taillights in sight as far as his eyes could see. Every once in a while, a single car would zoom past on the opposite side of the highway, but his side was completely empty. The pickup truck behind him then suddenly switched lanes and floored it. He could hear the loud, aggressive roar of the truck engine as it passed him on the right. The truck then cut sharply in front of him and immediately slammed on the brakes. The traveler tried to swerve around it, but the truck driver kept blocking him, forcing him to stomp on his brakes too. He started honking his horn frantically because it was the only thing he could do. As they slowed down, the man in the truck turned on his hazard lights and started waving his arm out of his driver's side window, signaling for the traveler to pull over onto the side of the road. The traveler obviously did not listen. He saw an opening and took the chance to quickly pull around the truck, just as it started pulling onto the grass, and then he floored it. His sedan was much faster than the old pickup, and he easily started to pull away. He hit 100 miles per hour, but the truck was still not far behind him, chasing him through the dark. He decided to get off the highway at the very next exit. He rolled down the exit ramp and came to a stop at the red light, thinking he had finally lost them. But to his absolute horror, the pickup truck headlights appeared behind him again, and then the truck pulled up directly next to him at the red light. The traveler looked over to his left. The window of the pickup truck rolled down. Inside the cab were 3 people. They were all wearing plastic Guy Fawkes Vendetta masks, and they all stared at him in chilling silence. They were clearly trying to terrify him, and it worked. Panicking, the traveler blew through the red light onto the main road. Fortunately, there were other cars around on this street, and the pickup truck finally gave up the chase and disappeared. The traveler was so shaken up that he parked in a nearby Walmart parking lot, locked his doors, and fell asleep from the sheer exhaustion of the adrenaline rush. He woke up around 8 in the morning and finished his drive to Boston. He told his entire family about the terrifying incident, and now warns everyone he knows to be extremely careful when driving late at night on lonely highways. Next, let us look at a story that happened on a cold Tuesday night in March. A young driver was heading back from a friend house in the city. Normally, the drive took about an hour, but an incredibly thick fog had settled over the lonely highway. It was past midnight, and the road was completely abandoned, save for the occasional semi-truck passing by. By 1 in the morning, the driver was feeling exhausted. He had spent the day walking around with friends, and the fatigue was catching up to him. His eyelids felt heavy, and the impenetrable fog made the highway look like an unending, drifting mess of hypnotizing gray. He drove with extreme caution, sometimes slowing down to a steady crawl and flashing his hazard lights to let any vehicles behind him know he was there. Suddenly, out of the thick gray mist, a vehicle appeared. It was parked halfway on the highway and halfway on the shoulder, completely dark. The driver slammed on his brakes and swerved, narrowly passing by the rear bumper, and pulled over directly behind it to catch his breath. His heart was beating heavily against his chest after the near miss, so he put his car in park to calm his nerves. He watched the black sedan in front of him. After a moment, the car began slowly rolling forward off the road until it was fully parked on the shoulder. Then the driver's side window rolled down, and an arm appeared, waving for him to pull over. Since the adrenaline was still pumping through his body, and he wanted to get further away from the active highway lanes, he decided to follow the black sedan as it took a slight turn onto a dark side road. The sedan came to a stop, and the driver door opened. A tall, lean man, wearing a black winter jacket and jeans, stepped out and began walking toward him through the heavy fog. He looked to be in his early 30s, and he had a warm, friendly smile on his face as he approached, illuminated by the driver headlights. The driver rolled his window down just a crack, thinking the man was coming over to apologize for his dangerous parking. The man reached the window and motioned for him to roll it down further, but the driver shook his head, saying he could hear him perfectly. The man asked where he was heading, and the driver replied that he was going home. The man then remarked that the fog was not supposed to let up anytime soon, and that it was not safe to drive in. The driver insisted he was fine, but the man raised his eyebrows and asked why he had pulled over in the first place if he was okay. Not wanting to start an argument, the driver lied and said he had received a phone call and needed to answer it. The man smirked, clearly realizing that the driver was lying to him. He then said that he lived with his wife and young son just 5 minutes down the road, and invited the driver to come wait out the fog at his house. The driver shook his head again, but the man was not taking no for an answer. He began trying to scare him, saying that it was 10 times more likely for him to die in a car crash in this weather, and that he looked far too tired to make it home safely. The driver held his ground, but the man was getting visibly angry. He began glancing back at his own car, and that was when the driver noticed a shadow moving in the passenger seat. Suddenly, the man lunged forward and grabbed the car door handle, trying to force it open. Thankfully, the doors were locked. At the exact same moment, the passenger door of the black sedan flew open, and another man came running out through the fog carrying a heavy baseball bat. Reacting on pure instinct, the driver threw his car in reverse and slammed on the gas. The man at the window screamed as the car shot backward. The man with the bat took a wild swing at his car but missed. The driver backed up all the way to the highway, spun his steering wheel, and threw the car into drive, praying there was no oncoming traffic. He floored the gas and merged back onto the highway, leaving the attackers behind in the fog. He still wonders what would have happened to him on that foggy night, if his doors had been unlocked, or if he had rolled his car window down any further. Finally, we have a story that took place during the early days of the pandemic in 2020, right when everything was starting to shut down. A young hospital worker would often work long overnight shifts, meaning his hours were completely unpredictable. On his way home, he would always take the exact same route, which was a quiet parkway that ran about 10 miles north toward his small hometown. This parkway was never busy, even during the peak of daytime traffic, but during the lockdowns, it became a literal ghost town. He almost never saw another car, nor did he ever see any state troopers patrolling the area at night. While this made his commute faster, it also meant that if anything went wrong, he was completely on his own. One night during the early morning hours, he was driving home down this dark parkway. Suddenly, he noticed a bright red flashing light on the side of the road. It was an emergency SOS signal perched on a stand, and the bright light was illuminating the tail lights of a car parked on the shoulder. Believing someone was in desperate need of help, the hospital worker decided to do a good deed and pulled over directly in front of the vehicle. As he parked, he saw a man standing near the car, waving his arms in the air. The worker stepped out of his car to approach him. The man appeared to be of Hispanic descent and spoke with a slight accent. Because he was wearing a protective mask, it was difficult to tell his age, though he looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s. The worker asked what the issue was, and the man replied that his car battery had died after he remained parked on the shoulder for too long. He asked if the worker had jumper cables, but unfortunately, the worker did not have any in his car. Since there was no way to jump-start the vehicle, the worker did not know how else to assist. But then the man asked if he could borrow his cell phone, claiming his own phone had died as well. The worker was naturally hesitant to hand his phone to a stranger on a dark road, but wanting to help, he unlocked the phone and handed it over. The man took the phone, opened the calling app, and began walking away down the side of the road as he started talking. However, he had left his car door wide open. The hospital worker, thinking he could help figure out the issue, decided to sit in the driver's seat of the man car to see if he could turn it on himself. The keys were still in the ignition. He turned the key one click to the right, and to his surprise, the dashboard lit up and the radio began playing. The battery was perfectly fine. He turned the key once more to start the engine, and it roared to life instantly. Before he could even realize he had been set up, two strong arms reached from the back seat and wrapped around his neck, choking him violently. Outside, the man with his phone was screaming and running back. The worker managed to break free from the teenager grip in the back seat, scrambled out of the car and sprinted back to his own vehicle. As he slammed on the gas and sped away, he heard a loud, deafening pop. A gunshot hit his car, shattering his rear windshield and leaving a large hole. Because the man still had his unlocked phone, the worker had to drive all the way home to call the police using his family landline. By the time he used his father's phone to lock his device remotely, the thieves had already opened his Coinbase account and transferred thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin to an untrackable digital wallet. A week later, his parents heard someone prowling around in their backyard, and though the police found no one, the family remained terrified that the criminals had used the home address on the stolen phone to find them. To this day, the young worker vows that he will absolutely never stop to help anyone on a dark highway ever again. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. When you check into a hotel room, you expect a safe haven. It is a place to rest, lock the door, and escape the outside world. But we often forget that hotel rooms are not actually our homes. The keys are in the hands of strangers, the hallways are open to anyone, and sometimes the locks we rely on do nothing to keep the monsters out. This is a lesson that 3 different people had to learn the hard way, in moments of absolute panic that changed how they view travel forever. The first story took place during a hot summer years ago. The narrator was just 12 years old, traveling with their mother and a much younger brother. They had arrived in a large city to visit family, but decided to stay at a local hotel to keep things simple. Because the brother was quite young, the 12-year-old was told to keep an eye on him. While the mother checked in, the kids sat on a couch in the lobby. The couch faced the entrance doors, giving a clear view of anyone walking in. While they were sitting there waiting for their mother, the front doors slid open and a man walked inside. He looked to be in his mid-40s, and he was very average looking. He had the kind of face that was completely ordinary, with no distinct features, so trying to describe him to a sketch artist would have been incredibly difficult. But there was something deeply unsettling about his behavior right from the very start. Instead of walking up to the front counter to check in or ask the clerk a question, he walked directly over to the couch opposite the 2 children and sat down. He did not look at his phone, read a newspaper, or look around the lobby. He just sat there in silence, staring directly at the 12-year-old and the younger brother with an empty, unblinking expression. The 12-year-old felt a deep sense of unease, wondering if the man had followed them inside. Luckily, their mother finished checking in and called them over. They went up to their room, dropped off their bags, and left to visit family, quickly forgetting about the strange man. They returned to the hotel around 7 that evening. The mother said they could go for a swim, so they changed and headed down to the indoor pool. For the first few minutes, the kids were having a great time, splashing around in the warm water. But then, the door to the pool area clicked open. The 12-year-old looked up and felt their stomach drop. Walking into the humid room was the exact same average-looking man from the lobby. What made it even more bizarre and terrifying was his clothing. He was wearing heavy blue jeans and a thick sweater, which was incredibly out of place for a hot, humid pool room. He did not get into the water or even take off his sweater. Instead, he just walked over to one of the lounge chairs, sat down, and began staring directly at the family again. At this point, the mother quickly grew worried and whispered that if he did not leave in 5 minutes, they would go. 5 minutes passed, and the man did not budge. They gathered their things and hurried back to their room. By then, it was close to 8 o'clock. They decided to watch a rented movie to unwind. The mother was clearly on edge, which made the 12-year-old even more anxious. Halfway through the film, the mother went to take a shower. While the water was running, there was a sudden knock on the door. A voice called out, "Housekeeping." The 12-year-old thought it was strange for cleaning staff to come so late, but since they needed another towel, they opened the door. Standing in the hallway was the creepy man from the lobby. He smiled and gave a slow, unsettling wave. The 12-year-old froze in absolute terror, their mind racing with horrific possibilities. And then, the sound of the shower water in the bathroom suddenly stopped. The man heard it, looked past the child, and whispered, "How was your swim?" At that exact second, the mother stepped out of the bathroom, saw the man, lunged forward, and slammed the door shut, locking it instantly. She called the front desk to report him and demanded a new room. As they waited, they heard heavy footsteps stomping down the hallway away from their door. They switched rooms and never saw him again, but the terror of that night remained forever. The second story involves a young man who was 24 years old and on an out-of-town business trip. When he was a child, he suffered from an intense, irrational fear of hotel rooms. He was always convinced that if he looked into the dark corners of a hotel room, he would see someone standing there, watching him in the pitch black. His paranoia was so severe that he insisted on sleeping between his parents until he was nearly 10 years old. Eventually, he grew out of it, or at least he thought he did. He was staying at a Comfort Inn in North Carolina, with all expenses paid by his job. The hotel was located directly across the street from a massive car dealership, which was the only notable landmark in the area. He decided to watch the horror movie Saw in his room. During a tense scene where a character hears noises in his dark apartment, the young man suddenly realized he was hearing a very real, crackling noise coming from inside his own hotel room closet. His childhood paranoia immediately rushed back, but he told himself to be logical. He was 24, and there was no way anyone was in his closet. To drown out the noise, he turned up the TV volume, took 2 sleeping pills, and turned off the lights to go to sleep. The crackling noise continued to happen once every minute, but the sleeping pills were strong, and within 10 minutes, he was fast asleep, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away. Hours later, he was jolted awake by the loud rustling of fabric. The room was pitch black. He reached over and frantically turned on the bedside lamp. Standing in the light was a massive man, at least 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighing around 250 pounds. The intruder was dressed entirely in black, with a hood pulled over his head, actively rummaging through the young man's travel bag. The young man screamed at the top of his lungs. The scream startled the giant intruder, who immediately turned and bolted out of the room. It turns out, the thief had escaped with the man's wallet and watch, but the psychological damage was far worse. The exact childhood nightmare he had feared for years had finally come true, leaving him with a lasting trauma he could never shake. He realized that the crackling noises he had tried to ignore were the sounds of a real person hiding in his closet, waiting for him to fall asleep. The third story took place in May of 2015. A 21-year-old man had been having intense arguments with his hot-headed father, often forcing him to leave the house for the night. After another explosive fight, he checked into a Quality Inn and Suites, located only half a mile from his home. He checked in around 4 in the afternoon and decided to clear his head by the empty outdoor pool. The hotel was incredibly quiet, with empty hallways and a deserted lobby. His room was in the middle of the hallway on the second floor. While he was relaxing on the bed, he suddenly heard a very light, quiet tapping on his door. He waited, expecting someone to call out housekeeping, but the hallway remained silent. He decided to ignore it, assuming someone had simply knocked on the wrong door. But then, to his absolute shock, he heard the distinct electronic beep of his door lock turning green. He had the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the handle, yet the door slowly began to open. Because there was an entryway wall that blocked his view of the door from the bed, he could not see who was entering. He called out, "No thank you, not right now." There was a brief, tense silence, and then the door was suddenly slammed shut with incredible force. The young man got out of bed, slightly angry but mostly confused, and walked out into the hallway to investigate. He looked to his right and saw nobody. He turned his head to the left, and at the very end of the long hall, he saw the right leg of a woman turning a corner before completely disappearing. He ran down to the end of the hall to see who it was, but when he turned the corner, the hallway was empty, lined with closed doors. He went down to the lobby to complain to the front desk worker about the rude employee who had entered his room. The woman behind the desk apologized and said it must have been Rosa, promising to speak with her about slamming the door later on. Later night, after talking to his mother on the phone, the young man went to sleep around 9. Sometime later, he was awakened by a strange sound. He sat up in the pitch-black room and heard a raspy voice whisper, "You have to let them in." He looked over and saw a completely unknown, older woman standing at the very left edge of his bed, towering over him in the dark. Before he could even react, she lunged forward, grabbed him tightly around his throat, and began choking him while repeating angry insults. Fortunately, the attacker was an older woman with a weak grip. The young man broke free, ran out of the room, and sprinted down to the lobby. The police were called, and a shocking truth was revealed. It turns out, an employee had lost a master key card that could open every door in the hotel, but failed to report it. A mentally unstable woman had found the key and used it to enter his room. The young man got a refund, gave a statement to the police, and went home. The incident terrified him, but it also forced his father to show sympathy, ending their constant fighting. Still, the thought of who has access to your hotel room door remains a chilling mystery. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. It was the autumn of 2016, a time when a bizarre and incredibly unsettling phenomenon was sweeping across the United States. It seemed like every single day, the news was flooded with stories of people encountering creepy clowns lurking in the dark. For most, this was just an internet trend to watch from the safety of their phones. But for one resident in Massachusetts, this trend was about to arrive right on their doorstep. This person lived on a beautiful, heavily wooded property. The house itself was tucked far back from the road, accessible only by a long, winding driveway that felt peaceful during the day, but incredibly isolated once the sun went down. On an ordinary afternoon, the homeowner was outside doing some routine yard work. A large drooping tree branch was hanging too low near the entrance of their driveway, and they decided it was time to cut it down. Standing near the edge of the road with their tools, they were focused on the task, but then they noticed something moving in their peripheral vision. They looked up and saw a figure walking slowly down the side of the road. It was a person dressed in a full clown costume. As the figure reached the exact center of the driveway entrance, they came to a complete stop. Very gradually, the clown turned their head to face the homeowner. Even though their body remained pointed down the road, the costume was genuinely terrifying, featuring a highly detailed, professional-grade horror mask. The homeowner tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just a local teenager pulling a prank. They smiled and gave a small nod, expecting the clown to do a fake charge like the videos online. But the clown did not move. They just stared in absolute silence before turning their head back and walking away. As evening fell, the memory of the strange clown faded. The homeowner went about their usual nightly routine. They went outside to lock up the tool shed, turned off the outdoor patio lights, and went inside to start preparing dinner. While they were working at the kitchen counter, They thought they heard a faint rustling noise coming from the backyard. Hoping to get a better listen, they stepped over to the kitchen window and opened it slightly. But all they could hear was the cool autumn wind blowing through the dry leaves. Shrugging it off as their imagination, they shut the window completely, locked it, and went back to cooking. Just moments later, a massive, violent pounding erupted from the very window they had just closed. The sound was so loud and sudden that their heart immediately began to hammer against their chest, and a wave of pure panic rushed through their body. Their hands shook as they instinctively reached for a large kitchen knife sitting on the counter. They tried to peer through the glass, but the darkness outside was absolute, making it impossible to see past their own reflection. They knew they could not just stand there in the dark. Gathering every ounce of courage, they crept over to the sliding glass door that led to the back patio. Their hand hovered beneath the light switch, frozen in fear. They waited for 5 agonizing seconds, bracing themselves for what they might see, and then they finally flipped the switch. The instant the patio light turned on, the homeowner gasped in horror. Standing right on the other side of the sliding glass door was the exact same clown from earlier that afternoon. The figure stood perfectly still, their head tilted sharply to the side like a curious dog, staring directly at the homeowner through the glass mask. The urge to slide the door open and defend themselves with the knife was strong, but panic kept them frozen. Instead of acting, they spun around and ran upstairs to find a phone. As they scrambled up the stairs to dial the police, a frantic, heavy pounding echoed from downstairs. The slow knocking had turned into a violent assault, with the clown repeatedly slamming both hands against the heavy glass pane. The noise filled the entire house, but then it got significantly worse. The clown began to scream. It was a manic, high-pitched screech that sounded like a psychotic patient. The homeowner clutched the phone in their dark bedroom, crying out to the emergency operator, feeling as though their life was about to end. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. The screaming and pounding continued relentlessly until suddenly, a booming voice cut through the noise outside. It was their neighbor, Marv, who was walking onto the property holding a rifle, yelling at the top of his lungs for the intruder to get the hell out of there. Looking out the window, the homeowner saw the clown spin around and sprint into the darkness of the woods. The police arrived shortly after, but after a brief search of the tree line, they found nothing. The homeowner spent the rest of the night at Marv's house, too terrified to remain home alone. A few days later, the terror spread from the isolated woods to the local high school. An Instagram account had been created under a clown-themed name, posting threats that they were going to show up at the school at exactly 11 o'clock in the morning. While the school administration took the threat very seriously, even calling in a SWAT team to monitor the campus, many of the students assumed it was just a massive hoax designed to disrupt classes. The narrator of this next encounter was one of those students who remained skeptical. However, as the clock ticked closer to 11, the tension in the classrooms began to rise. When 11 o'clock came and went with no signs of trouble, everyone started to relax. But at exactly 11:15, the school's loudspeaker crackled to life. The vice principal's voice came over the intercom, sounding completely panicked. He announced that the school was entering an immediate lockdown and ordered all teachers to lock their doors and windows. The skepticism vanished instantly, replaced by sheer terror. The students quickly huddled together in the darkest corner of the classroom, out of the line of sight from the door. They sat in absolute, suffocating silence for an hour and a half, waiting and listening for any sign of danger. Finally, the vice principal's voice returned to the intercom, announcing that the lockdown was over and that everyone was being dismissed early to go home. Relieved to leave the stressful environment, the narrator gathered their things and began the mile-long walk back to their house. The walk usually took about 20 minutes, and to help calm their nerves, they plugged in their earbuds and started listening to music. Part of their route required walking past several dense patches of forest. On any other day, they would not have thought twice about it. But today, the dark trees felt incredibly ominous. About 5 minutes into the walk, as they were passing a thick strip of woods, they saw a flash of bright color out of the corner of their eye. They quickly looked away, trying to convince themselves that they were just imagining things, but they could not resist looking back. Standing just inside the tree line was a figure, dressed in filthy, yellow and white polka-dotted baggy pants. The entire outfit was ripped and covered in dirt. Matching a tattered yellow button-up shirt, the figure wore a grotesque mask with wild, bright red hair puffing out from the sides. The clown stood perfectly still, their head tilted to the side, staring directly at the teenager. Suddenly, the clown let out a loud, hysterical laugh and began sprinting directly toward them. The narrators screamed in terror, dropped their backpack on the sidewalk, and ran as fast as they could back toward the school. They found a police officer parked near the entrance and frantically explained what had happened. The officer cursed, calling for backup, and several police cars sped toward the woods. Although they searched the area, the clown had already vanished. Rumors later spread that a clown had actually tried to walk up to the school's front doors during the lockdown, but the suspect was never caught. The terror reached its peak on Friday night, October 7th, 2016. It was around 1 o'clock in the morning, and another local teenager was walking home from a friend's house. Having had a few drinks, they were feeling a little buzzed. As they made the 1-mile trek back to their neighborhood, they eventually reached a familiar intersection where the paved road split, and a dark, unlit dirt trail led directly into the woods. During the day, this trail was a convenient shortcut that cut a solid 10 minutes off the walk home. At night, however, the woods were pitch black and incredibly creepy. Despite a strong feeling of hesitation, the teenager decided to take the shortcut to save time. They turned on their phone's flashlight and stepped onto the path, navigating through the thick trees. But about 50 yards into the forest, they heard a faint noise up ahead. It sounded like the rustling of leaves and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Normally, they might have assumed it was just local kids hanging out, but with the ongoing clown panic, they feared the worst. They quickly covered their phone screen to hide the light, stepped off the path, and hid behind the trunk of a massive tree. As the sounds grew closer, the teenager held their breath. They knew the chances of encountering a clown in the dark woods were slim, but they simply wanted to avoid any kind of confrontation. It soon became clear that there were two people walking down the trail. What made it truly terrifying was the absolute silence. There was no talking, no laughing, just the steady, rhythmic crunch of leaves under their shoes. And then, the footsteps stopped. The two individuals had stopped walking at the exact spot where the teenager was hiding. A cold, painful feeling of dread gripped his chest. Slowly, he peeked around the side of the tree trunk. Standing in the darkness just a few yards away were two figures dressed in oversized, bizarre clown costumes. It felt entirely surreal, like a nightmare come to life. The clowns stood perfectly still, knowing someone had been using a light just moments before. They were searching the darkness, waiting to see if anyone would move. For 20 agonizing seconds, nobody made a sound. Finally, the footsteps resumed, and the two clowns continued walking down the trail. Waiting until they were far enough away, the teenager bolted, running through the thick brush and making as much noise as needed to escape. He burst out of the woods, crossed the empty street, and reached his front yard. Once inside, he quickly locked the door and closed all the blinds. He walked to the living room to close the last set of blinds, but as he reached for the cord, he paused and looked outside. Across the street, standing perfectly still at the edge of the woods, were the two clowns. They were facing his house, standing like lifeless statues. Terrified, he woke up his mother. She rushed to look, but they were gone. Assuming he was just tired, she told him to go to bed. He climbed into bed but could not sleep, tossing and turning in the dark. Suddenly, a loud, heavy thud struck his bedroom window. He froze, closing his eyes and pretending to be asleep, hoping they would leave. But the tapping grew more aggressive. Fearing the glass would shatter, he opened his eyes and looked under the blinds. There, pressed against the window pane, was the face of a clown staring down at him. He let out a loud scream and ran crying to his mother. She grabbed pepper spray and rushed to his room, but the window was empty. The next morning she called the police to report the harassment, but the nightmare was not over. The very next night, he saw a single clown standing by the woods again, staring silently at his house. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. I am 24 years old, and back in the spring of 2020, I was still living at home with my mom, my dad, and my two younger siblings. Right around March, which was exactly when the coronavirus pandemic started to get really serious, and everyone was being forced into quarantine, my parents bought a brand new house. It was a beautiful two-story property in a quiet neighborhood. Because of the sudden lockdown, we spent our first few weeks there entirely focused on the unpacking and settling in phase. It was a stressful time to move, but we tried to make the best of it. My bedroom was located in the basement. I actually did not mind this setup at all, because the basement was the farthest away from my parents' room, which gave me a lot of privacy. Technically, the room I slept in was just an extra utility room that was never really meant to be used as a bedroom, but we cleaned it up and made it work. Plus, my parents figured I would be moving out on my own pretty soon anyway, so they did not see any point in giving me one of the nicer, larger bedrooms upstairs. The basement in this new house was absolutely massive. It was a really cool space, and because my bedroom was down there, I felt like the entire basement was basically my own private apartment. But right off the bat, almost immediately after we moved in, weird things started happening inside my bedroom. Most of these strange occurrences happened late at night. I would lie in bed and hear strange scraping sounds coming from the walls. One night, I got up and knocked on the drywall, and it sounded completely hollow. There was a small metal air vent right above my bed. I figured a small animal was trapped inside. I turned on my iPhone flashlight to look through the slats, but the duct was too dark to see anything. I assumed it was normal house noises, but decided that if the sounds continued, I would ask my dad to look into it. To keep myself entertained during the quarantine, I set up my Xbox on the big TV in the main part of the basement. My dad had mounted a 50-inch screen down there, and I usually preferred to hang out in the open basement area, rather than staying cooped up in my bedroom. One night, during our very first week in the house, I was playing Call of Duty Warzone. I was wearing my gaming headset, completely absorbed in the match, when I suddenly heard a very distinct, sharp sound. The noise came from the side of the basement where my bedroom was. It was muffled by the wall, which made me believe it had originated from inside my room. I quickly paused my game, took off my headset, and walked over to investigate. I pushed the door open, but the room was completely empty. Eager not to let my character die in the middle of the game, I hurried back to the TV. But as I sat down, I kept thinking about the sound. The best way to describe it was the sound of a heavy glass object, like a thick mug, being placed firmly onto a wooden table. I tried to convince myself that the sound had actually come from upstairs and had just vibrated down through the floorboards. The very next night, I was deeply asleep when I was suddenly awakened by some weird, muffled thumping sounds. I lay there in the dark, trying to figure out if the noise was coming from directly above my ceiling or from the side of my room. I grabbed my phone, walked over to the air vent, and shone the light inside once again. Just like before, I saw absolutely nothing. I was starting to get genuinely worried that we had a major rodent infestation inside the walls, so the next morning, I brought it to my dad's attention. He told me to let him know if the sounds continued, and he suggested that I try to record them on my phone if I heard them again. A few nights later, I woke up at around 4 o'clock in the morning, feeling incredibly thirsty. I reached for the water bottle I always kept on my bedside table, but it was completely empty. I had no choice but to head upstairs to the kitchen to get a refill. After filling my bottle with cold water, I began my descent back down the dark basement stairs. Midway down the staircase, in the pitch black, I froze. I thought I heard a faint, rustling noise coming from the bottom of the steps. I paused and whispered, "Hello," thinking that maybe one of my younger siblings was hiding in the dark to scare me. There was no response. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it down the remaining stairs to get some peace of mind. The basement was completely clear. I sighed, walked into my bedroom, and placed my water bottle on the small wooden ledge directly above my bed. But as I did, a sudden, overwhelming feeling of dread washed over me. My gut was screaming at me to look at the air vent in the wall one more time. I turned, lifted my phone, and flashed the light directly into the metal vent. It only lasted for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. Through the narrow metal slats, a pair of human eyes was staring directly back at me. They were wide, clear as day, reflecting the bright light of my phone. The moment the light hit them, the eyes quickly vanished backward into the dark void behind the wall. I did not look closer. I screamed, dropped my phone, and bolted out of the room, running up the stairs to find my dad. My family came downstairs, and I pointed at the vent. My dad took a look inside with a flashlight, but there was nothing there. My parents tried to convince me that I was just exhausted, seeing things because of a lack of sleep, and letting my imagination run wild. I did not believe them for a second. I refused to sleep in the basement that night. I grabbed a blanket, slept on the living room couch upstairs, and made sure the basement door was locked. The basement door only had a lock because of an outdoor entrance. The next afternoon, I went back down to grab some of my things and made a shocking discovery. On the far wall, a small wood panel was sitting slightly open. I called my dad downstairs, and together we pulled the panel back. It revealed a tiny hidden crawl space. On the dusty floor lay a blanket and a small wooden stool. We followed a narrow, dark corridor that stretched along the side of the house. At the very end, we found ourselves staring directly through the back of the air vent and into my bedroom. The realization hit us like a tidal wave. A stranger had been living inside our walls. They had been sneaking out at night to steal food from our kitchen, and they had been sitting on that stool, staring through the vent at me while I slept. When I had screamed the night before, the intruder must have realized they were caught and fled through the outdoor basement exit. We immediately changed all the locks, but the thought of those eyes in the vent still keeps me awake at night. Fast forward to April of 2020. I was living in a duplex. The house was split in two. Each side had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen. There was a connecting door between the 2 sides, but the lock was on the other side. My landlord Jose lived there. He had complete control of the door. I was not comfortable with this, so I installed a security camera in my living room, aiming it right at that door. One afternoon, while sitting in my car, my phone alerted me to motion. I opened the app and saw the connecting door open. Jose walked into my apartment. He stayed for a minute and then left. I raced home, but nothing was touched. That night, I confronted him. Jose claimed he smelled a burning odor and came in to check the stove. It seemed like a reasonable excuse, so I let it go. A few days later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was on a late Zoom call. My phone buzzed again with a motion alert. I closed my laptop and stepped into the pitch-black living room. Standing in the corner was Jose. He was holding something in his hand, looking lifeless and staring directly at me. I backed away and told him to stop. Jose did not speak. He started walking toward me like a zombie. I ran to my room, locked the door, and he began pounding violently on the wood with a blunt object, trying the doorknob. I yelled that I was calling the police. Suddenly, the pounding stopped, and I heard the connecting door slam. The police arrived, and we confronted Jose. He broke down, claiming he had a severe sleepwalking disorder caused by new medications. I decided not to press charges, but I barricaded the door with my dresser and moved out shortly after. I still do not believe his sleepwalking story. I believe he wanted to hurt me. Around that same time, my friends and I were going completely stir-crazy from the quarantine. To spice things up, we decided to go explore an old abandoned farmhouse just down the road from where we lived. It was my friends Luke, Kyle, and myself. Luke drove us there. It was only about a 10-minute drive down a winding hilly road. We pulled up to the overgrown, enclosed property where the empty farmhouse sat. Almost everyone in our town knew about this place, and knew that it had been abandoned for many years. Getting inside was incredibly easy. We simply broke a small window on the ground floor and climbed through. The inside of the house was freezing cold and covered in a thick layer of dust. When we turned on our flashlights, we could see dust particles floating everywhere in the beams of light. The most notable things about the house were the complete lack of furniture and the extremely creaky wooden floorboards. Even though we knew the place was abandoned, we still expected to find at least some old belongings left behind, but it seemed like local looters had already cleared the entire house out. We decided to split up to explore different sections of the ground floor. Within a minute, Kyle came tiptoeing back to us, his face pale in the flashlight beam. He whispered that he had heard someone or something moving in one of the other rooms. He pointed toward a dark hallway, refusing to go back over there. Luke and I quietly laughed, thinking he was either being paranoid or just trying to freak us out, but given how dark and silent the old farmhouse was, his claims did give me goosebumps. Luke and I still proceeded quietly toward the room Kyle had pointed at. It was almost impossible not to make a creaking sound on those rotting, terrible floorboards. We discovered that this part of the house contained a small hallway with a two-way staircase. One set of stairs went upward, while the other led down into the basement. But when I approached the basement staircase, my goosebumps returned. I realized that almost all of the stairs had completely collapsed. There was nothing left but a giant dark hole in the floor. As we stood over the edge, we heard a strange sound coming from the basement. It was a rhythmic, slow creaking noise that repeated every couple of seconds. Luke whispered to me, telling me to look down. I took a deep breath, knelt on the dirty floor, and pointed my flashlight down into the darkness. At first, I only saw the concrete basement floor and piles of rotted wood. But then I heard a quiet, raspy voice whisper from the darkness to my right. I quickly jerked my light to the side. There, sitting in a wooden rocking chair, was an old woman with long, messy gray hair. She was staring directly at me with a lifeless, malicious smile. I fell backward, dropped my flashlight, and screamed for my friends to run. We scrambled out of the window and ran to the car, where Kyle was already waiting. Luke hit the gas and we sped away into the night. We never went back there, and we still do not know how that old woman got down there with no stairs, or what she wanted from us. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. It was the sweltering summer of 2012, and a 15-year-old teenager was facing a highly frustrating problem. Because he had a late birthday, he was still 15 while almost all of his close friends had already celebrated their 16th birthdays. This minor age difference meant that while all of his friends were out easily securing official summer jobs at local grocery stores and fast food joints, no traditional business would even consider hiring him. He was desperate to earn some spending money of his own, so he decided to take matters into his own hands and look for alternative ways to make cash. He began browsing through Craigslist, specifically searching for off-the-books odd jobs that did not require a formal work permit. It did not take very long before he found an ad that seemed absolutely perfect for what he was looking for. The title of the listing read, "Looking for house cleaning services paying $10 an hour." The advertisement was very simple and clean, featuring just 2 photographs. One showed the exterior of a nice, typical, middle-class suburban house, and the other showed a tidy living room interior. The listing mentioned that the homeowner lived in the next town over, and the only listed method of contact was through a private email address. Without hesitating, the teenager sent an email to the poster, explaining that he was only 15 years old, but was highly motivated, responsible, and more than willing to clean the house for the advertised rate of $10 an hour. To his utter surprise, the homeowner responded in less than 10 minutes. The man laid out his daily work schedule and explained exactly when he would need the teenager to be available. The teenager replied that the schedule worked perfectly for him, but then the man asked a very practical question. He wanted to know if the teenager had a reliable means of transportation to get to and from the house every day. At that exact moment, the teenager realized he had made a major oversight. He had not even considered how he would travel to the next town, and he knew his mother would not be able to drive him back and forth every day because of her own busy work schedule. But before he could even reply with his worries, the man offered an incredibly generous solution. He said that he actually worked very close to the teenager's neighborhood, so coming over to give him a lift to and from the house every single day would not be a problem at all. It seemed like an incredibly lucky break. Without even asking his mother for permission first, the teenager eagerly agreed to the arrangement. The man asked for his home address, and the teenager sent it over. The man said he would be at his house at exactly 8:30 on Monday morning to pick him up. Come Monday morning, the teenager walked outside and waited by the curb. Right on time, a sleek black 2005 Nissan Maxima pulled up to the house. The man driving the car had a thick, dark beard and was wearing a New York Mets baseball cap. He did not look like he was dressed to go to a professional office job, but the teenager did not think much of it at the time. The man introduced himself as James. The car ride over to the house was relatively quiet but pleasant. Once they arrived at the suburban home, James unlocked the front door, handed the teenager the house key, and told him to just straighten things up, fold some laundry, and keep the place tidy. Then, James got back into his car and drove off in a major hurry. The teenager found it a bit unusual that a grown man would trust a 15-year-old stranger completely alone in his house. But he brushed the thought aside and got to work. The house itself was actually not very messy at all. All the teenager had to do was fold a few piles of clean clothes, wash some dishes in the sink, and use a small hand vacuum to tidy up some of the carpets. However, there was one major issue that made the work environment incredibly difficult. The house was extremely hot. It felt significantly warmer inside the house than it did outside in the midsummer sun. The teenager looked around and noticed that every single window in the house seemed to be completely sealed shut. He wanted to turn on the air conditioning system, but he was too polite to touch the thermostat without getting permission first. He endured the suffocating heat for 6 long hours until James finally returned at the end of the day. James handed him $60 in cash, drove him back home, and was incredibly polite the entire time. The teenager felt like he had truly lucked out. This routine went on smoothly for a good 2 weeks. His mother was perfectly fine with the arrangement because James was highly reliable, extremely polite, and always paid the teenager exactly what was promised. But then, one Friday night, the comfortable routine was shattered. The teenager woke up in the dead of night feeling intensely thirsty. He quietly got out of bed to go to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. As he walked past his bedroom window, something caught his eye. He looked outside into the pitch-black yard, and his blood ran cold. There was a dark silhouette of a person, standing directly outside in the grass, staring intently through the glass right into his bedroom. The teenager let out a terrified scream. His parents came running into his room to see what was wrong, but by the time they turned on the lights and looked outside, the mysterious intruder had already vanished into the darkness. The next time the teenager went to work, the weather outside was absolutely brutal, reaching at least 100 degrees. Inside the sealed house, the heat was completely unbearable. The teenager finally worked up the courage to ask James if he could please turn on the air conditioning. James looked at him with a straight face and said that the system was broken, but then, James said something that made the teenager feel incredibly uncomfortable. He told the teenager that if he got too hot while working, he should just take off all of his clothes. The teenager laughed nervously, desperately hoping the man was just making a highly inappropriate joke. But James did not laugh. He was completely serious. A heavy wave of dread washed over the teenager. James dropped him off at the house and drove away. Inside, the temperature had soared to at least 105 degrees. The heat was so intense that the teenager had to work completely shirtless, and he had to constantly step out onto the back porch just to breathe the slightly cooler outside air. He barely managed to drag himself through the rest of the day. The very next day, during the car ride to the house, James delivered some highly unwelcome news. He told the teenager that he actually had the day off from work and would be staying at the house to help him clean. The teenager was not happy to hear this at all. He much preferred being left alone, especially after the creepy comment from the day before. Throughout the day, the teenager noticed a deeply unsettling pattern. No matter which room he went into to clean, James would slowly follow him, lingering in the doorway and watching his every move. Feeling increasingly suffocated and anxious, the teenager decided he needed to escape the man's gaze for a moment. He ran upstairs to the bathroom, making sure James was not following close behind him. He stepped inside, closed the door, and locked it securely. But as he stood in the bathroom, his eyes drifted up to the corner of the ceiling. He noticed a tiny, dark object pointing directly down from the wall. He got closer and was absolutely horrified to realize it was a miniature hidden camera, positioned to capture the entire room. He began scanning the rest of the bathroom in a panic, and sure enough, he spotted a second hidden camera tucked away in the bottom corner near the floor. Terrified, he began searching the entire bathroom to see what else might be hidden. He opened the wooden cabinet underneath the sink, hoping to find some answers, but what he discovered was infinitely worse than he could have ever imagined. Sitting in the dark cabinet were 2 massive stacks of VHS tapes. Each individual tape had a yellow sticky note attached to it with a handwritten name. The teenager looked at the tape sitting directly on top of the stack, and his heart completely stopped. The sticky note had his own name written on it in bold letters. a wave of intense nausea hit him. He realized he was in extreme danger and had to find a way to get out of that house and get home safely. Just then, there was a loud, firm knock on the bathroom door. It was James, asking if he was doing all right in there. The teenager tried his absolute best to keep his voice from shaking, replying that he was suddenly feeling very sick and asking if James could please drive him home right away. James paused for a moment before agreeing, saying that he actually had to run some errands anyway. The teenager stepped out of the bathroom, and James told him to wait by the front door while he quickly used the restroom himself. Once they got into the car, the atmosphere was completely different. For the first half of the ride, James did not say a single word. He just stared straight ahead at the road with a cold, blank expression. The teenager looked out the window and quickly realized they were not taking the usual route. In fact, they were driving in the complete opposite direction of his neighborhood. Terrified, the teenager nervously asked where they were going. James slowly turned his head, looked him dead in the eye, and asked what he had been doing in the bathroom. The teenager panicked and remained completely silent. James asked again, his voice dropping into a deep, aggressive growl. Fortunately, they came to a sudden halt at a red traffic light. Seizing his only chance at survival, the teenager unlocked the passenger door, threw it open, and sprinted out of the car into the busy street. He ran as fast as he could, dodging behind buildings until he was completely out of sight. He pulled out his phone, called his mother while sobbing hysterically, and begged her to come pick him up. His mother rushed to his location and immediately contacted the police. The authorities wasted no time and executed a search warrant on James's house. Beneath the bathroom sink, they uncovered the massive hoard of VHS tapes. The footage on those tapes was far more monstrous than anyone could have predicted. While some tapes showed children performing ordinary house cleaning tasks, other tapes captured horrific acts of abuse. The most chilling part of the entire investigation was that several of the children identified in those videos were listed as active missing persons. James was arrested and faced a mountain of severe charges, including child pornography and kidnapping. The teenager realized with absolute certainty that if he had not jumped out of that car at the red light, he likely would have become another missing child statistic. And so, life went on, but the lurking dangers of online classifieds remained ever present. Fast forward to about 3 months ago, when a young college student and his roommate decided they wanted to buy a used couch for their apartment. They had a very tight budget, so they figured Craigslist would be the perfect place to search for cheap, second-hand furniture. The young man spent some time scrolling through the listings, and after clicking through about 3 pages of advertisements, he found a listing for a beautiful black leather couch. According to the seller, the couch was in fantastic condition, and the price was listed at a remarkably low $200. The young man had a brief passing thought that this deal was simply too good to be true, but he decided to ignore his gut feeling. He emailed the seller, agreed on the price, and received an address to pick up the couch. The problem was, his roommate was currently working overtime at his job, meaning the young man would have to make the drive and pick up the heavy couch all by himself. The address was located quite a bit outside of the main town, in a highly isolated area completely surrounded by dense, towering trees. In fact, the house was so deeply hidden in the woods that you had to drive all the way up a long, private dirt driveway just to see the structure. The young man parked his car, stepped out into the quiet woods, and walked up to the front door. The house was a small, weathered wooden cabin that looked incredibly eerie in the dim afternoon light. He knocked on the door once, but received no answer. He knocked a second time, and then a third time. This time he heard the distinct, heavy creaking of wooden floorboards coming from directly inside the house. Anyone could tell that these were footsteps, but the sounds were highly unusual. It sounded as though someone inside was deliberately tiptoeing toward the door, trying to move as silently as possible. Suddenly, a faint, muffled voice spoke through the thick wood of the closed door, asking if he was the couch guy. The voice sounded incredibly rushed, tense, and anxious. The young man replied that yes, he was there for the couch. The voice from behind the door quickly instructed him to walk around to the backyard, claiming that the leather couch was already set up back there. The young man felt a sudden, sharp wave of unease wash over him, but he brushed the feeling aside, telling himself that he was just being overly paranoid. He walked around the side of the wooden cabin and stepped into the backyard. What he saw there was an image that would be permanently burned into his memory. Standing in the middle of the overgrown yard were four exceptionally tall men. They were all dressed in identical, flowing black robes, and they stood in a tight circle with their hands pressed together in front of them. Directly in front of the robed men was a large, deep pit dug into the ground. The pit was covered by a heavy wooden hatch, secured tightly with a thick, rusted metal chain and a padlock. Before the young man could even begin to process the bizarre and terrifying sight, the rushed voice of the man from inside the house spoke behind him, asking where his friend was. In that single horrifying second, the young man realized what was happening. The occupants of the house had expected him to bring someone else to help move the heavy couch, and they had prepared a trap to capture both of them. He did not say a word. He immediately spun around on his heel, ran back to his car as fast as his legs could carry him, and frantically shoved the key into the ignition. He started the engine, and as he glanced up at his rearview mirror, he saw the front door of the cabin fly wide open. He slammed the car into first gear, stepped on the gas, and fled down the dirt driveway, leaving the terrifying scene behind. But the one detail that continues to make his blood run cold to this day is that throughout all of his email communications with the seller, he had never once mentioned to him that he had a roommate. But the absolute terror of these online encounters is not limited to adults or teenagers. At this point, let us look at another terrifying incident involving a young girl who was only 12 years old at the time. She had received a large amount of craft supplies for Christmas and was looking for a cheap storage bin to keep everything organized. Since the plastic storage totes at the local retail stores were far too expensive, she and her 27-year-old older sister decided to look for a second-hand option on Craigslist. They quickly found a listing from a seller offering a massive plastic storage tote for only $10. This was an unbelievable deal, as a brand new tote of that size would easily cost around $100. The seller lived relatively close to their neighborhood, so they sent an email to inquire about the item. The seller responded within an hour, asking where they should meet up to complete the trade. The 12-year-old girl suggested meeting at the local Dollar Tree parking lot, which was a very short, safe walk from their apartment building. But to her surprise, the seller immediately rejected the idea and asked if he could just bring the tote directly to her home. Since they lived in a secure apartment complex, having a complete stranger come directly to their door was highly inconvenient and felt unsafe, so the girl lied and claimed they lived much farther away. The seller quickly offered to drive the distance to meet them, but they firmly declined. Eventually, the seller agreed to meet at the Dollar Tree parking lot, but he insisted that he could only make it at 9 o'clock that evening. Even though it would be pitch black outside by then, the girl agreed to the time. It turns out, her older sister had to work a night shift at the local hospital that evening, so she told the young girl that she could walk to the Dollar Tree and back on her own, instructing her to bring her wooden pull-along wagon so she could easily haul the heavy plastic tote back. Her sister handed her a $10 bill, and at 8:30 in the evening the young girl began her walk. She arrived at the Dollar Tree parking lot right on time. Standing in the dark lot, she spotted a beat-up, rusted 2006 Kia parked near the edge of the property. Assuming this was the seller, she walked over and called out, asking if he had the tote. A man stepped out of the vehicle, but his hands were empty. He claimed that he had accidentally left the plastic tote back at his house, and he asked the 12-year-old girl if she wanted to hop into his car and take a quick drive with him to go get it. The girl immediately felt an intense wave of discomfort. She firmly said no, explaining that her family would not allow her to get into a stranger's car. The man then offered to drive her all the way back to her home afterward, but she refused again. The man leaned in closer, lowering his voice, and told, "Working the night shift is a very specific kind of experience. Most people who take these late-night jobs do it because they want peace and quiet. They want to avoid the busy crowds of the daytime, the endless streams of demanding customers, and the stressful energy of a standard 9-to-5 workday. When you look at it from the outside, it seems like a pretty easy gig. You think you will just sit there, do a little bit of basic work, scroll through your phone, and get paid for basically doing nothing. But there is a very dark side to the graveyard shift that most people do not think about until they are right in the middle of it. When the sun goes down, the entire world changes. The streets become completely empty. The bright daytime lights are replaced by dim fluorescent tubes, and you are often left entirely alone in a quiet building. Your mind starts to play tricks on you, and every little creak of the floorboards sounds like a footstep. But the real danger is not in your head. The real danger comes when you realize that the silence outside is not empty. When something goes wrong in the absolute middle of the night, there is nobody around to help you. There are no coworkers to back you up, no managers in the next room, and no crowds of people to notice that you are in trouble. You are entirely on your own, and sometimes, the only thing standing between you and a complete stranger is a locked glass door or a thin wooden counter. Today, we are going to look at 4 chilling stories of night shift workers who realized too late that they were not as safe as they thought. Our first story comes from a hotel night audit worker who experienced something so deeply disturbing that she still has trouble sleeping to this day. This happened about a year ago at a small independent hotel. It was a modest 3-story building with only 40 guest rooms in total. It was not a busy place by any means. On typical weeknights, we would only have 10 or 15 of those rooms occupied by guests. The rest of the building was completely empty and dark. Her shift ran from 10 o'clock in the evening until 6 o'clock in the morning. It was usually an incredibly boring and quiet shift, which was exactly why she liked it. She would spend her nights sitting behind the main desk, completing some basic daily paperwork, checking the security feeds, and watching videos on her phone. The lobby itself was quite small. It had the main reception counter, a couple of couches off to the side with a small television, and a few vending machines in the corner. Directly behind the front counter was a small back office. This office had a computer, a desk, a chair, and a large glass window so she could sit comfortably inside while still keeping a clear eye on the lobby area. At night, the front glass doors of the hotel locked automatically for security. If a guest arrived late, they had to press a buzzer outside the door. She would then look at the security camera feed, see who it was, and press a button under her desk to unlock the door and let them in. Usually, nothing of note happened after midnight, but on this particular night, around 11 o'clock, a man pressed the buzzer. She looked at the monitor and saw a tall, thin man in his mid-40s. He was wearing blue jeans, a dark baseball cap, and he had a black backpack slung over one shoulder. She pressed the button to let him in. He walked up to the counter and politely asked if there were any vacant rooms for the night. She told him that we had plenty of space and gave him the standard nightly rate. The man nodded, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a credit card. She took the card and swiped it through the magnetic reader. The machine made a beep, and everything seemed completely normal. She programmed a key card for room 214, which was located on the second floor, and handed it to him. But when she handed him the key, the man did not just take it and walk away to the elevator. Instead, he stood there at the counter. He looked at her with a completely blank expression. His eyes locked onto hers, and he just stared at her for about 3 or 4 seconds. It was a long, silent, and incredibly intense stare that made her feel extremely uncomfortable. Finally, without saying another word, he turned around and walked toward the elevators. She shrugged it off, sat back down in the office chair, and went back to playing on her phone. Around midnight, she looked through the glass window and noticed that the man was back in the lobby. He had not come back to the front desk to ask a question. He had simply walked past the desk and sat down on one of the couches in the lounge area. The television in the lobby was turned off, but he sat there facing the dark, blank screen. She figured that maybe he was just having trouble sleeping. It was not completely unusual for guests to hang out in the lobby when they could not rest. So she did not think too much of it. But after 30 minutes, she looked up again, and he was still sitting there. He was doing absolutely nothing. He did not have his phone out, he was not reading a book, and he was not even closing his eyes to rest. He was just staring straight ahead at that blank television screen. At one point, she decided to get up to grab a bottle of water from the vending machine in the corner of the lobby. As she walked across the open room, she could feel his eyes on her. She did not look at him directly, but she could see him slowly turning his head, tracking her movements as she walked to the machine, and tracking her all the way back to the safety of the desk. The intensity of his gaze gave her a very uneasy feeling. By 1 in the morning, she was getting bored, so she decided to log into the hotel's reservation system to check the list of occupied rooms. When she opened the screen, her heart skipped a beat. Room 214 was listed as vacant. She stared at the screen, thinking she must have made some kind of mistake. She had literally checked this man into room 214 just 2 hours earlier. She went into the check-in logs to see what had happened. There was no record of his check-in. There was no name, no room assignment, and no payment. She went into the credit card transaction history to see if the payment had been declined or canceled, but there was absolutely nothing there. No record of any transaction existed. She distinctly remembered swiping his card and hearing the machine beep, but the system had absolutely no memory of it. She picked up the desk phone and dialed room 214. She waited as it rang. It rang 10 times, but nobody answered. Next, she checked the key card entry logs. This system records every single time a key card is used to open a door in the building. She looked at the log for room 214, and it showed nothing. No one had used a key card to open that door all night. That was the moment she realized the terrifying truth. The man had never gone up to the second floor. He had taken the key card, walked toward the elevator, and then simply waited. And now, he was sitting in the dim lobby, staring at a blank screen. She looked through the window and saw him still sitting there. A heavy, cold feeling of dread washed over her. She sat there trying to decide what to do. Maybe it was just a strange computer glitch. But the fact that the room door had never been opened made it clear that he was not where he was supposed to be. She watched him for another 15 minutes. By 1:30, she decided she had to address the situation. She walked out from behind the desk, kept her distance, and asked him if everything was okay. The man slowly turned his head, looked at her with no expression, and told her that he just could not sleep. Then he turned his head back toward the blank television. She quickly went back behind her desk, but her hands were shaking so much she could barely type. Around 2 in the morning, she looked up and saw that the couch was empty. The man was gone. Her stomach dropped. She had not heard the front doors open, which meant he was still inside the building. She scanned the lobby and finally spotted him. He was standing at the very end of the hallway near the restrooms. He was standing in the shadows, half hidden in the dark, completely still, just watching. She sat back down and pretended to be busy on the computer. He stood there for several minutes before slowly walking back to the couch and sitting down as if nothing had happened. Terrified, she called her manager at home. The manager sounded tired and told her to just keep an eye on him and call the police if he did anything threatening. She hung up, thinking that his behavior already felt incredibly threatening. She decided to use the security cameras to track his movements. She watched him on the monitor. He got up from the couch again, walked down the first-floor hallway, stopped at the end, stood there in the dark for several minutes, and then walked back. Later, he went into the concrete stairwell and stayed in there for about 10 minutes. She had no idea what he was doing in there. Every time she looked up from the computer, he was somewhere else. He stood by the vending machines, near the elevator, and in dark corners where the light did not reach, and he was always staring. By 3:30, she could not take the tension anymore. She called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. They told her they would send an officer when one became available. While she was waiting, the man moved closer to the desk. He was standing about 15 feet away, just watching her. He barely blinked. He did not say a word. He just stood there, staring with an intensity that made it hard for her to breathe. At 10 minutes to 4, the front buzzer rang. It was another guest returning late. She quickly let him in, and the suspicious man turned his head to watch the guest walk past, studying his movements closely. A few minutes later, the man disappeared again. She checked the camera feeds and saw him standing directly outside a guest room door on the first floor, leaning his ear close to the wood as if he was listening to the people inside. That was the breaking point. She dialed 911. She told the emergency dispatcher that an intruder was standing outside a guest room door. They told her officers were on the way. The man stood at the door for about 3 minutes before walking back to the lobby. This time, he walked straight up to the counter and leaned over. He looked at her and asked in a low, disturbing voice if there was any food. She told him there were vending machines in the corner. He gave her a small, unsettling smile and walked away. Finally, at 10 minutes past 4, 2 officers arrived. She let them in and pointed to the man on the couch. They questioned him, checked his identification, and escorted him out. An officer came back inside and explained that the credit card the man had used was stolen. He had no luggage, no reservation, and was trespassing. He had used the stolen card just to get past her and gain access to the building. The police charged him with trespassing and credit card theft. After they left, she sat behind the desk, shaking until her shift ended. The thought of him wandering around the hotel for hours, standing in the dark, and listening at guest room doors was too much to handle. She never found out what his plan was, but she knew it was dangerous. Our second story involves a young woman named Meredith, who learned that sometimes the person watching you is closer than you could ever imagine. Meredith was 24 years old and worked the night shift at a small, isolated gas station off County Road 11. It was a lonely stretch of road, surrounded by empty fields and thick woods. Most people only stopped there if they were running out of fuel, or if they had taken a wrong turn and were completely lost. She liked the quiet nature of the job. It was predictable, and she enjoyed having the time to herself. But that peaceful routine changed on a foggy Thursday night around 1 in the morning. The air outside was thick and damp, and the heavy fog made it impossible to see beyond the edge of the gravel parking lot. The buzzing sound of the fluorescent lights overhead was starting to get under her skin, making her feel slightly anxious. She decided to heat up a cinnamon roll in the microwave to pass the time. Just as she was about to press the start button, the chime above the front door rang, indicating that someone had walked in. She looked up and saw a man walking into the station. He looked to be in his mid-40s, perhaps a little older. He was wearing a dark green winter coat. His hair was messy, and his lips were dry and chapped. Instead of browsing the snack aisles or going to the coffee bar like most customers at that hour, he walked straight to the counter. He stopped and stood there, staring at her with a strange look of intense familiarity, as if he knew exactly who she was. Meredith forced herself to give a polite customer service smile. She said hello and asked if she could help him. The man looked at her for a moment before speaking. He asked her if she always worked this late. Meredith was a bit surprised by the personal question, but she answered politely that she did, mostly. The man smiled. He told her that he had passed through a few times, and noticed it was always her working the night shift. That statement immediately made her feel uncomfortable. There was an intense, lingering quality to his voice. He then leaned slightly closer and said her name. He said, "Meredith." Right, Meredith froze. Her heart began to beat faster. She was not wearing a name tag, and she had never seen this man before in her life. Before she could even ask how he knew her name, he pointed toward a small whiteboard near the coffee station, where she had written a message about a new coffee flavor. He told her that she had very nice handwriting. He pointed out that most people dot their letters with circles, but she used little slashes, which he called very specific and thoughtful. Meredith was completely speechless. The man did not purchase anything. He just stood there for another minute, watching her face and studying her reactions, before introducing himself as Paul and walking out into the thick fog. After that night, Paul began showing up on a regular basis. It was not every single night, but it happened often enough that Meredith knew it was not a coincidence. Sometimes he would come inside the store to buy a bottle of water, and other times he would just sit in his car at the very edge of the dark parking lot with his headlights turned off, watching the building. One night, she decided she was going to ignore him. He came in and commented that she seemed quieter than usual. She kept her head down and muttered that it was a long shift. Paul slowly looked around the empty store and remarked that it must get very lonely out there in the dark, with no one else around for miles. Meredith told him she was fine, but Paul leaned his elbows on the counter and asked if she ever got scared being a woman alone at night. His voice was calm and neutral, which made it even more terrifying. He then pointed out that she always kept the back room door locked, adding that he had noticed she checks that lock around 2 in the morning every single night. Meredith was terrified. She did not answer him. Paul gave her a soft, almost apologetic smile, saying he did not mean to make her uncomfortable, before turning around and walking out. From that night on, Meredith was in a constant state of fear. She began walking to her car with her keys clutched tightly between her fingers, hid a heavy metal tire iron under the counter, and started locking every door in her apartment, even when she was home alone. Some nights he did not show up, but the waiting was worse than his actual visits. Then came the night of the photograph. Meredith had stepped away from the counter to take a quick 10-minute break in the back room. When she came back out, she noticed something lying on the counter. It was a physical Polaroid photograph. She picked it up and looked at it. It was a close-up photo of her from behind, taken while she was refilling the windshield washer fluid bin outside the station. There was no written note, but the letter I in the word windshield on the bin label had been circled in red ink. The next time Paul came inside, Meredith did not hold back. She told him to leave immediately and threatened to call the police if he ever returned. Paul remained completely calm. He told her that he had been too forward, but he believed she was someone who was used to being misunderstood. He said he thought she would appreciate someone who paid attention. Meredith yelled that it was an obsession, not attention. Paul did not flinch. He asked if it would be easier if he wore a fake smile and brought her a soda, or if he pretended not to notice that her shoes were a half size too big, or that her left eyelid twitched when she was tired. While he was talking, Meredith dialed 911. Paul did not try to run. He just stood there with his arms at his sides, waiting. The police arrived quickly and arrested him. They searched his car and found a notepad filled with Meredith's work schedule, notes about her clothing, her walks, and her groceries. On the last page, her name was written over and over again in tight, overlapping loops until the paper was completely covered in black ink. Paul insisted to the officers that he was just a curious guy who noticed things. A restraining order was issued, and Meredith relocated to a different gas station 2 hours away. But even now, the sound of his voice still haunts her. Our third story comes from another young woman who worked the weekend night shifts at a 24-hour gas station. She was 22 years old and had been working at this particular location for just under 2 months. She worked the busy weekend shifts, which ran from Thursday night through Saturday night, while her coworker Max worked the quieter weekdays. One Friday night, around 2:30 in the morning, Max and his friend Ben decided to stop by the station. They had taken some magic mushrooms a few hours earlier, so they were in a very giggly, joyful, and talkative mood. The narrator was happy to see them because the shift had been slow and boring, and their silly energy was a welcome distraction. As they were hanging out by the front registers, Ben casually mentioned that there was a car parked at the very edge of the parking lot. He said the car was running, but its headlights were completely turned off, and there was someone sitting inside the driver's seat. Ben explained that he had actually walked over to the car earlier to see what was going on. When he asked the driver why he was parked there, the man told him that he was just waiting for a DoorDash food delivery order to be prepared. Normally, this would not be a strange thing at all. Many food delivery drivers park in gas station lots while they wait for orders to pop up on their phones. But the problem was that the narrator had not received a single delivery order on her tablet in nearly 2 hours. She had spent most of her night cleaning the back storage room, which was far away from the front registers and the glass entrance doors. From where she was working, she had absolutely no view of the parking lot. At first, the three of them did not think too much of it. They laughed it off, and Max and Ben went outside to smoke a cigar and play with Max's dog in the parking lot. The narrator went back to her cleaning duties in the back room, but once she was alone in the quiet back room, the situation started to feel a little strange. It was odd that a driver would sit in a dark running car for so long without an active order. An hour passed. It was now around 3:30 in the morning. Max and Ben came back inside the store to get more coffee. This time, Max's playful mood was gone. He looked genuinely concerned. He explained to her that the car was parked in a very specific spot that was completely blocked from the view of the registers by a thick concrete wall. Max said that for the entire hour they were outside playing with the dog, the driver in the dark car had been acting extremely suspicious. He kept switching between staring intently at them and looking down at his phone, as if he was sending urgent text messages. Ben, who was still feeling the effects of the mushrooms, had decided to walk back over to the car. He knocked on the window and asked the driver why he was staring at them. At first, the man tried to pretend that he did not speak or understand any English. But when Ben did not back down, the man suddenly switched to perfect English. He stammered that he must have the wrong address. Then, he put the car in gear and quickly drove out of the parking lot. But the details Max noticed next were what made the situation truly terrifying. Max said the car looked brand new, but it had absolutely no license plates on the front or the back. He also noticed that the back seat was filled with a massive pile of heavy blankets, easily enough to cover and hide a person. And there was more. Just as the man was being confronted by Ben, another vehicle had slowly pulled into the gas station lot with its headlights turned off. This second vehicle also looked brand new, and it also had no license plates. As soon as the first car sped away, the second car immediately turned around and followed it out of the lot, driving closely behind. Max stayed at the station for another 15 minutes to make sure she was safe. He was extremely worried about leaving her alone, and he kept telling her to be alert and to keep her phone in her hand at all times. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Max actually came back to the store. He had gone home, rested, and was now completely sober. He wanted to check on her to make sure she had made it through the night without any issues. He admitted that once his mind was clear, he realized just how dangerous the entire setup looked. We both began to realize that if Max and Ben had not been there, this scenario could have gone in a very bad direction. If she had been completely alone, those two unmarked vehicles could have easily blocked her in, or entered the store without anyone noticing. She carried a pocket knife, but she knew that against multiple coordinated people, a knife would not have been enough to protect her. The next night, she hoped that she was just being paranoid. She hoped it was a complete misunderstanding. But at 3 in the morning, she was mopping the tiled floors when a group of 4 men came inside to buy some snacks and coffee. As she was ringing up their purchases, one of the men looked out the window and asked if she knew anything about the running car parked at the far end of the gravel lot with its headlights turned off. Her heart immediately dropped into her stomach. She asked him what the car looked like. The customer described a brand new Subaru with no license plates. He told her that as they were pumping gas at the farthest pump, they noticed the car. They walked past it to get to the front doors of the store. As they passed, they could hear the passenger talking very loudly and pointing directly at the front doors of the gas station. One of the guys in the group had started walking toward the car to ask if everything was okay, but as soon as the men in the Subaru realized they were being approached, they threw the car in reverse and sped away. The group of customers realized how terrified she was, and they offered to hang around the lobby for about 20 minutes to make sure the car did not return. She let them have their coffee for free, and they eventually left once they were confident she was safe. She spent the rest of her shift in a state of absolute terror. She had never actually seen the car herself, but multiple groups of strangers had warned her about its presence. The fact that the same unmarked car returned 2 nights in a row, parking in the exact same blind spot, made it clear that they were targeting her and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Our fourth and final story comes from a motel night auditor named Daniel, who experienced a terrifying close encounter that still haunts him. Daniel was 29 years old and worked the overnight shift at a small family-owned rural motel. The property was very small, with only 2 floors and about 25 guest rooms in total. Daniel worked from 10 in the evening until 6 in the morning. The motel was located on a quiet, isolated stretch of state highway, far away from any major cities. Because it was so small, they rarely got any late-night check-ins. Most nights were completely silent, which was exactly why Daniel took the job. The layout of the motel was very simple. There was a small front lobby with a counter, a coffee machine, and some brochures. Behind the counter, a narrow hallway led to a private back office. This back office was where Daniel spent most of his time. It was set up like a small lounge, with a desk, a television, a small refrigerator, and a comfortable couch. The best part of this setup was a small speaker mounted on the wall of the back office. This speaker was wired directly to the bell on the front desk. Whenever a guest walked up to the counter and pressed the metal bell, a loud ding would echo through the back office. This meant that Daniel did not have to sit at the front desk all night. He could relax on the couch, watch movies on his laptop, or even take a light napping break, knowing that the speaker would always wake him up if someone needed assistance. It was a Tuesday night in late autumn. The weather was freezing, with temperatures dropping into the low 40s. The parking lot was almost entirely empty, save for a few cars belonging to sleeping guests. Around 2 in the morning, the speaker in the back office suddenly let out a loud, clear ding. Daniel stood up from the couch, stretched his arms, and walked down the narrow hallway to the front desk. But when he stepped into the lobby, there was nobody there. He walked to the glass front doors and looked out into the parking lot. The area was dark and completely still. There were no headlights on the road, and no new cars had pulled into the lot. Daniel figured that maybe a guest had rung the bell and then decided to walk back to their room before he could get there. Or perhaps he had just imagined the sound. But the bell was very loud, and he knew his mind was not playing tricks on him. He shook his head, walked back to the lounge, and lay back down on the couch. Not even 10 minutes later, the speaker chimed again. This time, Daniel jumped up and ran down the hallway. He wanted to catch whoever was doing it. But once again, the lobby was completely empty. The air in the room felt colder. Daniel walked outside onto the concrete sidewalk. He looked in both directions, shining his phone flashlight into the dark corners of the building. But there was nothing. No footstep, no shadows, no sound at all. He went back inside. He decided that he was not going to go back to the lounge. He was convinced that someone was playing a prank on him. Maybe a local teenager was playing a game of ding-dong-ditch. Daniel pulled up a chair and sat down directly behind the front counter. He turned off some of the overhead lobby lights, making the room dim and casting long shadows across the floor. He sat there in silence, staring at the small metal bell on the wooden counter. He waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The lobby was so quiet that Daniel could hear the slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back office. His eyelids began to feel heavy. He started to think that the prankster had given up and gone home. He let out a soft sigh and began to relax his posture. And then, right before his eyes, it happened. A pale, bare hand slowly rose up from beneath the front desk. The fingers reached over the edge of the counter, extended, and pressed down on the metal bell. The loud ding echoed through the empty room. Daniel's heart stopped. The realization of what was happening hit him like a physical blow. Someone was not outside. Someone was not hiding in the parking lot. They were crouching directly under the desk, right next to his legs. They had been sitting in the dark, inches away from him, waiting. The sheer terror of the moment sent a jolt of adrenaline through Daniel's body. He did not think. He did not scream. He simply threw himself backward, scrambling away from the desk as fast as his legs could carry him. He bolted down the narrow hallway, threw himself into the back office, slammed the heavy door, and locked it. He stood in the darkness of the office, his chest heaving, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his phone. He looked at the security monitors on the wall. The camera feed showed the lobby. The chair he had been sitting in was knocked over on its side. Then, in the corner of the screen, he saw movement. A head slowly poked out from beneath the front desk. The person was wearing a dark, oversized hoodie. The hood was pulled tight around their face, but Daniel could see the glint of their eyes looking directly up at the security camera. It was as if they knew exactly where the camera was, and they were staring right at him through the screen. Daniel forced himself to look away from the monitor. He dialed 911. His voice was a panicked whisper as he told the dispatcher that an intruder was hiding inside the motel lobby and had tried to trap him. The dispatcher told him to remain in the locked room and assured him that officers were on their way. While he was on the phone, Daniel looked back at the screen. The intruder had crawled completely out from under the desk. He stood up. He was a tall, hunched-over figure. He began to pace slowly around the dim lobby. He walked with a strange, deliberate stride. Then the man turned and began walking down the narrow hallway, straight toward the back office. Daniel pressed his back hard against the locked door. He held his breath, terrified that any sound would give away his position. A second later, he heard the metal doorknob rattle. It was a slow, agonizing rattle. The person was testing the lock. Daniel closed his eyes and prayed. After what felt like an eternity, the rattling stopped. The footsteps slowly back down the hallway. Daniel rushed back to the monitor. The man was back in the lobby, pacing back and forth. At one point, he stood in front of the brochure rack, casually flipping through the colorful papers, as if he were simply waiting for a train. Finally, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars illuminated the parking lot. The moment the intruder saw the lights, he bolted out of the camera's view. When the police officers cleared the building, they found the lobby empty. The suspect had managed to escape through a side door just as the officers were pulling up. But the police did find something else. They found a large, heavy rock wedged into the frame of the side door. The intruder had used it to keep the door propped open, so he could slip inside without making a sound. They searched the surrounding woods and the highway, but they never found the man in the dark hoodie. To this day, Daniel cannot escape the memory of that night. He can still see that pale hand slowly reaching up from beneath the counter. Pressing the bell, he eventually quit the motel job. He realized that the quiet of the night shift is not always a peaceful thing. Sometimes, the quiet is just a mask for the terrifying things that are waiting in the dark. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. When I was a kid, my parents would sometimes bring me down to my aunt and uncle's place to stay for the weekend. Mainly, I would spend my time playing with my two cousins who were around the same age as me. They lived on a small farm with plenty of open space, and we could run around, doing pretty much whatever we wanted if we thought we could get away with it. The three of us would sometimes cross over to the neighboring farm, about half a mile away. It had been abandoned for decades, with a scattering of derelict buildings and other structures still standing on the property, just begging to be explored. This was, of course, a goldmine for three adventurous young boys, such as ourselves, especially after my cousins told me stories about the deaths that took place in the house. It was pretty classic fare. A man goes crazy, axe murders his entire family, hangs himself, and returns every night as an angry spirit looking for new victims. Good, grisly stuff. Even at that age, I knew they were probably making it up, but seeing how the setting lent itself to such tales, I allowed myself to buy into it and make believe. One hot summer afternoon, we decided to play a big game of hide and seek. When it was my turn to hide, I ran off toward a flimsy brown barn that had living quarters on top. I climbed the creaking stairs, looking for a really good spot. There was still old furniture inside, and personal belongings lay scattered across the floor. I maneuvered over broken dishes, tattered clothes, and crumbling books, eventually coming to a small room with a closet. Jackpot. There were even long black dresses still hanging on the rod that I could hide behind. I stepped inside and managed to force shut the folding door. My only illumination was a slit of sunlight that shone through the crack in the door from a nearby window. I crouched down with my knees tucked tightly into my chest and waited. A lot of time passed, and there was still no sign of my seekers. I waited some more, debating in my head if and when I should give myself up. After nearly an hour of waiting in the dark, this was starting to get very boring. My head drooped, and I fell fast asleep. I woke with a jerk. It was pitch black, drowsy and confused. I forgot for a minute where I was or what I had been doing. As it came back to me, the realization that it was now nighttime, and that I had been abandoned here filled me with a sinking dread in the pit of my stomach. I tried to get up, but a sudden cramp in my calf kept me grounded. I squirmed about, waiting for it to pass, when I heard a door slamming shut downstairs and instantly froze. Was it one of my cousins? There was a brief period of silence, then footsteps at the bottom of the stairs. But not just footsteps, there was a thud too after every other step. These were not the footfalls of a child. They were slow, heavy, and deliberate. I held my breath, praying they would go away. They did not. The noises continued to ascend. After another moment of silence, the walking resumed, this time along with a steady scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. The footsteps made their way through the debris and wandered aimlessly through the various rooms. As the sounds got closer, I thought I could smell something faintly putrid. The constant scrape sent cold shivers coursing down my arms and back. My worst fears were realized when the steps reached the bedroom doorway. They got closer and closer, and finally stopped directly in front of the closet door. I could not see a thing. After an agonizing pause, they continued on over to the other side of the room and out the doorway again. They faded away down the hallway. I waited for what seemed like an eternity. There were no more sounds now, and I was trying to build up enough courage to open the door and flee. Just then, three things happened simultaneously. I was bombarded with a smell I can only describe as fresh roadkill. I heard raspy breathing behind me in the dark closet, and I felt hot breath against the nape of my neck. That was enough for me. I hurled myself out from the confines of that nightmare space, relying on memory and scant moonlight to navigate through the darkened house. All the while, I heard footsteps chasing behind me, closing in with terrifying speed. It was a clumsy, torturous escape, full of trips and bumps and blind stumbling. I never looked back, at least not until I had burst out the front door and into the country night. And when I did turn around, I saw absolutely nothing. There were no more footsteps, and nobody was chasing me. That did not stop me from running, though all the way back to my aunt and uncle's house. There was a police car in the driveway when I got back. My parents were there too, worried sick. Everybody demanded to know where I had been. Apparently, when my cousins still had not found me by evening, they had returned home to tell their parents, and eventually, the police were called in. The police informed me that they had already scoured every building on the farm, and the insinuation that I was lying about my whereabouts did not go unnoticed. None of it made any sense. It was not until years later that one of my cousins filled in a final piece of the story. He and his brother had spent hours searching for me, but they kept a secret. They thought they saw me in the bedroom window. When they got closer, they saw that it was not me. A young boy neither of them recognized was smiling and waving down at them, gesturing for them to come upstairs. That is when they ran back home. All of this happened while I slept in the closet. Fast forward to a few months ago, I was over at my friend's house down the block. I am 16 years old right now, the second oldest out of the group of kids. There is Alan, who is 17, and Dan, who is in the same grade as me but a little younger. Then there is Johnny, who is 14, Daniela, who is also 14, Nick, who is 13, and Tom, who is only 12 years old. There is a big age gap, but we are really the only kids on the block. Me and Dan were the closest friends, and we met the other kids while hanging out. It became our Friday night tradition to play a big game of manhunt by Daniela and Nick's house. We do not live in a typical suburban neighborhood. Our area is a lot more spacious and overall has a lot less people and houses. For that reason, there was not a lot going on in our area, but it also made the game that much more fun. On this night, it was our turn to hide first. I had 3 other kids on my team, including Dan. Me and Dan went next door to Mr. Nelson's old house. He was an old man who passed away a few years ago, and since then no one has bought the house, leaving it vacant and a perfect property to add space for our game. We went to the back of the property by the lake, finding a perfect hiding spot in his bushes. Dan wanted to try something crazy and entered the vacant house through a sliding window, so I waited alone. The goal was to get back to Nick's house, our home base. A big part of the game is waiting. I was in those bushes for 5 minutes until I saw 2 kids from the other team searching the backyard. Once they left and continued further down the block, it was our chance to run. I looked up at the windows, hoping Dan would be standing there so I could wave him on. I was relieved to see his head looking down from an upstairs window. I waved to him, letting him know it was time to go, but he did not move. I was not sure if he could see me. I went over to the window that he entered through, opened it, entered the house, and yelled up into the darkness, calling Dan's name. My heart stopped when I heard Dan's voice only a few feet away from me saying, "Dude, shh." I asked him how he got downstairs so quickly, and he just looked confused. He told me he was sitting down here this whole time. At that same moment, we both looked up to the ceiling as there was a creaking sound coming from upstairs. We both hopped back out the window and ran back to Nick's house, calling the game off. We went to ask Dan's dad if somebody had moved into the home, but he was positive that nobody had lived there for 3 years. Me, Alan, Dan, and Dan's dad went over to investigate. We entered the same way we had earlier. Dan's dad was familiar with the house, as he used to be good friends with Mr. Nelson. He led the way upstairs into the bathroom. He flicked on the lights, and besides a crumpled up, reddish-brown blanket on the floor, the room was empty. We went through the entire house and found nothing. Dan's dad said, if any of us ever see anything in that house, we would report it to the police immediately. It has been a few months, and we have not seen anything since. But I know someone else was in that house that night. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. It is the middle of the night, and the world outside your house is completely dark. You are fast asleep, warm and safe in your bed. But then, a sudden vibration from your nightstand wakes you up. You reach over, squinting at the bright screen of your phone. It is a notification from your doorbell camera. It says there is motion at your front door. At first, you try to convince yourself it is just a neighborhood cat or maybe a stray dog wandering across your porch. But when you tap on the live video feed, your heart drops. You see a figure. The person on your screen is crouch walking. They are moving slowly, keeping low to the ground to avoid detection. They are wearing a thick hat, a face mask, and dark sunglasses. Not a single inch of their face is visible. This actually happened to a homeowner who shared his footage. He watched in absolute silence as the masked stranger crept up to his door. The figure reaches out and gently grabs the door handle. He twists it, but the lock holds. The door does not budge. The stranger does not run away. Instead, he steps closer and starts to fiddle with the doorbell itself. He quickly realizes that it is a video camera. He tries to rip the device off the wall, but he cannot get a grip. These security doorbells are designed to stay put, and without a special security screwdriver, they are almost impossible to unmount quickly. When the intruder realizes he cannot break the camera, he decides to do something else. He reaches his hand out and holds it directly in front of the lens, completely blocking the view. The homeowner is frozen in his bedroom. It is 2:00 in the morning. His phone is chiming with the Ring notification, and he knows that just a few yards away, a masked predator is standing on his porch. As the homeowner watches the screen go black under the stranger's hand, he hears the motion sensor on the side of his house trigger. The man is moving. The homeowner immediately dials 911. He is whispering to the dispatcher, trying to keep his voice as quiet as possible so the intruder does not hear him inside. While he is on the line, a sudden sound makes his body go rigid. It is the sound of his side entrance doorknob being rattled. This side door was a major vulnerability. The homeowner admitted that he was known to occasionally leave this door unlocked by accident. But on this particular night, luck was on his side. He had locked it. When the intruder realizes the side door is also locked, he does something incredibly chilling. He does not flee. Instead, he starts to speak. In an overly friendly, cheerful voice, he starts saying hello over and over again through the door. The tone is so warm and casual that it makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It is the voice of a person trying to sound like a harmless neighbor, but in the dead of night, it sounds like pure evil. The dispatcher tells the homeowner to stay silent and not to open the door or even acknowledge the person under any circumstances. Soon the stranger begins to violently bang on the door. After a few terrifying moments, the banging stops, and he seemingly gives up. The man disappears into the darkness. The police arrive a short while later, but they cannot help much based on the video. Later that night, the homeowner gets another motion alert at his front door. When he checks the video feed, he cannot see anyone. He still has no idea who was under that mask and glasses. But sometimes, the things caught on these cameras are not calculated predators. Sometimes they are people who have completely lost touch with reality. In another quiet neighborhood, a homeowner had recently moved out of his house and put it up for sale. Even though the house was empty, he kept his doorbell camera active, just to keep an eye on the property. At around 4:30 in the morning, his cameras detected a man running from across the street from his neighbor's house, across his front yard, and up to his front door. The man was completely naked. He had one hand covering his private parts, and he looked absolutely panicked. The footage was caught from 2 different angles. The naked man ran onto the porch and rang the doorbell. For the next minute or so, he was knocking and pacing back and forth on the porch. He looked completely panicked, and his expression drifted from someone in pain to a look of pure crazy. At one point, he screamed out that he needs help. After that, he ran off back into the night. The guy was picked up by an officer around 5 in the morning, not far from the house. It turns out the man was high on crystal meth. He had removed his clothing due to a fear of snakes being inside of his clothes, and he was running around the neighborhood, knocking on doors and ringing doorbells, yelling for help. The neighborhood is reportedly pretty quiet, and the homeowner never had any sort of issues before this. This bizarre footage is why you always check who is at your door before you open it, especially late at night. If someone you do not know shows up to your door late at night, do not open it. Unfortunately, that is exactly what another homeowner did at around 1 in the morning. A suspicious-looking hooded man approached his front door rather quickly and aggressively. He tried to open the door, and after realizing it was locked, he went to ring the doorbell. Disappointingly, the homeowner opened the door rather quickly, instead of checking who was at his door at this hour first. The homeowner was too trusting, which put him in danger. His initial hello to the stranger sounded overly friendly. The second the door opened, the stranger tried to creep in. The homeowner pushed the man out, causing him to punch the glass of the door before it was even fully closed. The man stood there for another minute, fiddling with the doorknob. The dialogue was near impossible to make out, but the man seemed to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, likely attempting a burglary. The homeowner called the police, but the man was gone. This next image was posted by the owner of a Ring camera in a Facebook group to caution others. The woman warned her neighbors to beware of a strange man wearing a white mask, lurking around the neighborhood after her camera caught him, trying to look into her home a little after 10 at night. She posted the disturbing picture showing the man in the mask looking directly into the camera. This is exactly the type of image you never want to see. Neighbors of the woman also reported seeing the man walking around and approaching their front doors, but thankfully no one opened the door to him. On May 1st, 2020, around 9:40 in the evening, during the beginning of the lockdowns, a 45-year-old dad named Raymond Hawkins opened the door to who he believed to be a delivery driver dropping off a parcel. Due to new safety methods because of the virus, the delivery driver backed away from the front door to keep his distance and claimed he needed to take a picture of the package at the doorstep. The father had his guard down, having no idea that the man in front of him was actually part of a gang that was about to storm his house. Christopher Sargent, the fake delivery driver, lunges at Raymond with a knife and attacks him when he goes to pick up the package. 3 other masked men follow from behind. Muffled cries come from the house as there is a struggle between Raymond, his wife, and the robbers. The robbers are only in the house for a few moments before being seen fleeing the house with thousands of dollars worth of items. Raymond and his son suffered non-life-threatening injuries. While his sons were described to be worse, 2 of the culprits were arrested, Anthony Lasis and Christopher Sargent, who were both charged with aggravated burglary and possession of a knife. The other 2 culprits were never found. One thing that can be learned from these videos is that some people will go to crazy lengths to trick others. The major red flag in this case was that the supposed delivery was taking place at 9:40 at night, which is way past the time any notable delivery company will deliver packages. Their standard cutoff time is usually 7 in the evening. On April 10, 2020, a doorbell camera captured a terrifying situation. A young woman named Kayla in a small California town was being stalked by her former friend Thomas. Thomas had become obsessed with her over time and constantly expressed his love for her, despite Kayla telling him numerous times that she did not feel the same way. The week this footage was taken, Kayla was bombarded with text messages and voicemails from Thomas. As the messages kept coming, she realized how crazy he might be. In his voicemails, Thomas sounded incredibly unstable. He left a message saying he wanted to make sure she was not too worried about what happened at a party last week. He called her beautiful and apologized for getting sick, saying he wanted to be with her. But then he got extremely angry, screaming that he could not get her out of his head and wanted to be everything to her. He called himself her Flynn Rider and yelled that he was already driving to her house. He claimed he was so crazy for her that he would drive into a field. He warned that his phone was dying, but said he would still drive by her house in the middle of the night, daring her not to have her blinds open to check. The footage of him showing up to Kayla's house at 2 in the morning was captured right after one of his phone calls saying he was coming over. Eventually, Kayla and her friend Ron would investigate and find out that Thomas was not even his real name. His real name was actually Matthew. He had been using the fake name Thomas Castle, which was a reference to the Marvel comic book character Frank Castle, also known as the Punisher. Thomas was a reference to Thomas Jane, the second actor to play the Punisher, and Castle was a reference to Frank Castle. The fact alone that he had been using a fake name with his friend and supposed love of his life was already a huge red flag and a clear sign that he was hiding something dark in his life. The ring footage was taken at 2 in the morning, and after leaving her house, he would go on to send some more text messages, which would progressively get angrier. 4 days after this footage was taken, Kayla and her friend went to the police and filed for a restraining order. He left her alone about a month or so after the restraining order was put into place. Kayla blocked his number and blocked him on all social media, and reportedly he basically disappeared from the world. No one knows where he is now, but the fear of him showing up again never fully goes away. These incidents show us that our homes are not always the safe havens we think they are. Doorbell cameras have changed the way we monitor our properties, exposing the hidden dangers that lurk just outside our front doors. They show us the stalkers, the predators, the home invaders, and the desperate people who walk around our streets while we sleep. While these security devices help us stay safe, they also leave us with a haunting and lingering truth. Sometimes, the most terrifying things are the ones we never expected to see, standing on our own front porch in the dead of night. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. A young man once decided to take a solo trek on the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, which is the longest hiking-only trail in the world. He went alone for fun. Since it was late fall, it was cold, and he only ran into 2 other hikers going the opposite way. This part of the trail was in thick forests and was definitely a scenic walk. The trail ran alongside a river where nothing could be heard but the flowing water and early morning birds chirping. After walking for a while, it was time for him to sit down and take a break. He found a big rock sitting aside the river and sat down. He took a sip of his Gatorade, and then he could swear he heard a baby crying coming from the distance. It was coming from further down the trail, in the direction he was walking. Of course, he had to get up and follow the sound, because of that off chance that a baby was stranded in the woods alone. As he walked further down the trail, the baby crying stayed the same distance away. This went on for about half a minute of walking fast before he gave up and assumed it was someone with a baby walking down the trail. He sat down on another rock he found on the side of the trail by the river, trying to catch his breath. Eventually, the crying seemed to just stop. It did not fade away. It stopped abruptly. He sat on that rock for 5 minutes, taking in nature and taking a few videos on his phone. That was when he heard footsteps approaching. Expecting to see another hiker, he instead saw a frantic-looking woman hurrying over to him. She came so fast and so close that it actually scared him. She stopped uncomfortably close to his face and started screaming, asking if he had seen her baby. He calmly told her he heard a baby crying not too long ago and told her to follow him. They walked quickly down the trail in the direction he was chasing the sounds earlier. He looked back every few seconds to make sure she was keeping up with him. Eventually, he asked her how on earth she lost her baby, but she did not answer. So he turned around again and stopped when he saw she was gone. The weird thing was, she was right on his tail just 10 seconds ago. He screamed out for her a few times, cupping his hands around his mouth, but the only sounds around him were the birds chirping in the river. He figured even if she trailed off away from him, he would at least still be able to see her in the distance. He stood there for a long time deciding what to do next. Should he just move on with his life and continue the trail, or walk back and try to find this woman? He did one more quick scan of the area they just came from. What he saw next was incredibly disturbing. In that very spot, he saw the woman standing across the river, her arms hanging lifelessly at her sides. She was looking at him, not saying anything, and not moving a muscle. She had a blank expression, just standing like a statue watching him. He decided to move the hell on with his life. He walked as fast as he could away from there, until his calves hurt from walking so fast. Eventually, he made it back to his car after looping around another trail, cutting his hike short. He was truly unsettled by what happened and started to question his sanity. It seemed so unreal, and yet at the same time it felt completely real. He wanted to know if anyone else had experienced something like this. Now you might think that staying closer to a populated area would keep you safe. But for another young man, a late-night run in a suburban nature preserve turned into a literal fight for his life. He lived in a suburban area with little green space, except for a huge preserve near his house with miles of trails. One night in 2016, at around 11 o'clock, he decided to go for a run. He liked to avoid people when he went for runs. He held his phone with a tight grip, keeping the flashlight turned on, and started his run at the edge of the preserve onto the dirt hiking trail. He felt like he had more energy running at night, although it was hard to describe why. There were no lights at all in the preserve. It was entirely just dark nature. There was also a dead body that had been found in the preserve just the previous week, but he did not really let that concern him too much. He lived in one of the safest neighborhoods in the state, and it was a weeknight, so he assumed there was literally no one else in this preserve but him. Well, that was at least what he thought. He ran for about 10 minutes before his legs grew heavy and his muscles began to burn because he used to be quite out of shape back then. He had to stop to catch his breath, so he sat down on the first bench he found. He had to admit it was creepy as hell being in a pitch-black preserve like that all alone. It felt exactly the same as being alone in the middle of a forest. There were weird sounds coming from all around, and to be quite honest, it was scaring him. Of course, he assumed most of them were just animals. But then he heard leaves and sticks crunching nearby. He figured it was a raccoon or a fox. But anyone's worst nightmare came true when he noticed something tall hiding behind one of the trees. He could not quite tell what it was because an iPhone flashlight is only so bright. He stood up and walked a little closer, doing a crutch walk because for some reason he thought that would make him more low-key. He got close enough to where he saw a hand wrapped around one of the trees. The hand was wearing an old white glove. He felt his heart sink like he was suddenly in a life-or-death situation before he could even see who was behind that tree. Then they finally decided to reveal themselves. Someone dressed as a clown stepped right into the range of his flashlight. This was back during the clown epidemic of 2016. From what he could see in the little light he had, this person had gone all out with his clown costume, from the makeup right down to the clown shoes. The most disturbing part was the bat he was holding, which had a large foot-long metal spike wedged straight through it. His head was angled down to give a more menacing, terrifying look, and he began to walk very slowly toward the runner. He had only one option, and that was to run as fast as he could, even though he was already so tired. He did not run on the trail. Instead, he ran straight into the woods until he felt like he was going to throw up. Then he shut off his flashlight and crouched down behind a tree. He heard running footsteps zoom past him, maybe 10 feet away. When the footsteps faded away into the distance, he ran back to the trail and ran all the way back the way he came. He actually puked by the time he made it to the street, just from running so much. Everyone in the community figured that the dead body found the week before was linked to this clown epidemic. He stayed away from the preserve for a long time, and he definitely never went in there past dark ever again. Our final story takes us even deeper into the wilderness, where a solo camping trip turned into a psychological nightmare. A young man went on a solo camping trip to the woods just a few miles from his house. After setting up his camp and eating, he took a half-hour nap in his tent before looking for a hike. It was a normal hike in a rather quiet forest, until he thought he could hear footsteps nearby. He could have just chalked them up to being the footsteps of an animal, but they sounded distinctly human-like. Deep in the woods and far from urbanization, it was definitely odd to cross paths with anyone there. However, he did not go looking around for anyone. He simply continued with his hike. When he got back to his campsite and approached his tent, the first thing he noticed was that the zipper to his tent was undone and the door flap was left open. Right away, his heart was racing at the thought of someone having been in his tent. He checked to make sure that nobody was still in there first, and then went inside to look around. He saw that his bag had been gone through. Surprisingly, nothing was taken. He contemplated packing up and moving spots, but he figured it was pointless. Whoever came had already scoped out the place and left, so they would not have a reason to come back. Fast forward to that night when he finally got into his tent to go to sleep. A few minutes after getting into his sleeping bag, he heard a noise. The first time he heard it, he had no idea what it could be. but the second time, it sounded like a staticky breathing sound. He sat up and looked around his tent, but at that point everything went silent. After sitting up with his heart racing for a decent while, he laid back down and tried to move past it. But after not even having his eyes closed for 10 seconds, he heard it again. It was a grainy, staticky breathing noise. He started digging through his bag and found something he knew for certain he did not pack. He pulled out a huge, archaic-looking walkie-talkie, and the static was coming from that. He instantly associated it with the footsteps and whoever searched his tent. But all he was thinking was, why would they put that there? Just then, the static stopped, and there was a breathing sound coming from the walkie-talkie. Then, in a deep, almost unintelligible whisper, he heard the words, "I'm not your cat." It is crazy how in just a couple of seconds your whole world can change, and your body can be overcome with fear. He frantically pressed buttons on the oversized walkie-talkie until it finally turned off. Then he heard something heavy hit the ground outside the tent. He had a choice. Do I stand ground and protect myself, or do I make a straight dash for the pickup truck? When he heard something else hit the ground right outside the tent, he chose the latter. He made a run for his pickup, leaving behind his tent, sleeping bag, and other equipment. None of that stuff really mattered when his life was potentially on the line. For all he knew, it was a trap to get him to leave his stuff behind, or it was someone who genuinely intended to harm him. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.